Chapter 3587. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the majestic Xiao Hua who was floating in the air. Hiss, pooh, Fire Virtue Taoist was even more shocked. When the pressure collided, he sucked in a breath of cold air. His nascent soul trembled slightly. When a powerful magic power surged over, without waiting for him to activate his magic power, that magic power had already crushed his nascent soul's hand. Under the backlash of the magic power, a mouthful of essence blood flowed up. I am Taoist Master Xiao. How can you taint my foundation? Erecting a blood steel in Seven Suns Temple, killing State Preceptor in Black Wind Ridge, killing Prime Minister's father in front of Jade Mountain. If you weren't a friend of Taoist, would you have already offered your head as a sacrifice? Xiao Hua arrogantly flew into the air. His gaze was like a knife, sweeping past Fire Virtue Taoist. Then, without turning into a rainbow, he slowly flew out. Xiao Hua flew extremely slowly, but his aura was like a rainbow. Not to mention the nascent soul cultivators were dumbfounded, not daring to speak. Even Fire Virtue Taoist's gaze flickered. Although his natal magic treasure and nascent soul were already prepared, he still didn't dare to move. That move of Xiao Hua's earlier had truly intimidated him. If it wasn't for the fact that Xiao Hua was at the upper stage of the 4th grade of Essence Energy and had the strength of the lower stage of the 5th grade of Essence Energy, how could he possibly injure him in one move? He couldn't be sure if Xiao Hua would still be able to keep his life after he used his magic treasure. Taoist Master Xiao Hua. I know, it's Xiao Hua, Bronze Pillar states Xiao Hua. Taoist Master Yufeng, who had long been hiding in the distance, suddenly seemed to wake up. He cried out ecstatically, the world's Taoist sects have long declined. Today, the hidden immortal Taoist gate opens. With me, Xiao Hua, in the world, you dare to let your disciples be bullied? Such arrogant words are actually true. Could it be? Bronze Pillar states State Preceptor and Prime Minister's father were killed by you? Unfortunately, why would Xiao Hua care about them? His figure flew out of the cave and disappeared. Xiao, fellow Taoist Xiao. Hong Songzi called out, but he hesitated again. If he were to chase after Xiao Hua now, he would be going against Taoist Huada. He knew Taoist Huada inside out, but he wasn't particularly familiar with Xiao Hua. Hong Songzi was helpless. He looked at Taoist Yuan Qing. The two of them exchanged glances, then sat back down. They had brought Xiao Hua here, so Taoist Huada would definitely ask about it. They could only wait and see. Taoist Master Yufeng, what's going on with this Xiao Hua? Hong Songzi and the others were afraid of Huadzinren. Naturally, they were not afraid of Huadzinren. Taoist Master Yufeng was somewhat proud and somewhat regretful. He glanced at Taoist Master Huada, then at the several cultivators who were questioning him. Not daring to offend anyone, he could only smile apologetically and say, fellow Taoists, it's actually just some rumors. I can't be sure, so I didn't think of it earlier. The world's Taoist sects have long declined. Today, the hidden immortal Taoist gate opens. With me, Xiao Hua, in this world, you dare to let your disciples be bullied? A cultivator with a grave and stern expression said coldly. Your tone is too big. Even a 7th-level essence energy cultivator wouldn't dare to say such a thing. This guy actually dares to talk nonsense? Speaking up to here, that cultivator's face suddenly revealed a strange expression. He shouted loudly, however, I like it. Damn it, how come I didn't think of such a good word? Come, old brother Yifeng, let's drink a big cup of wine. Taoist Master Chu is in a good mood. This old man will accompany you in a cup. This Xiao Hua is called Taoist Master Xiao. His arrogance is actually on par with yours. That cultivator called Taoist Master Yifeng scooped up his cup and raised his foot to drink with Taoist Master Chu. Unexpectedly, he didn't put Taoist Master Huada in his eyes. Then, he looked at Taoist Master Yufeng. Yufeng, quickly tell us everything you know, damn it. It's been a long time since I was this happy. Yes, two seniors. Taoist Master Yufeng smiled bitterly. In his heart, he somewhat regretted speaking too much just now. At this moment, how could Xiao Hua be as arrogant as Taoist Master Chu thought? In his heart, he really was somewhat angry. Ignorant man. Xiao Hua was still flying in the air, still cursing himself. You really ruined my important matter. This Xiao still wanted to hide a bit of my cultivation, so as not to let those Confucian cultivators notice. Although the matter of the copper pillar state was not small, it was still a matter of the country. Lung Chinga and the others were only at the lower fourth level of essence energy. Even if some high-level Confucian cultivators knew, they wouldn't pay too much attention. I only needed to pass this Jade Pavilion gathering, then accumulate strength. After 10 years, 100 years later, those high-level Confucian cultivators would notice me again. I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to do anything to me. But now, this damn Taoist master Huada completely messed up. In the future, this Xiao will be hunted down by Confucian cultivators. Xiao Hua was somewhat upset. Yes, Xiao Hua had been carefully hiding his cultivation since he started refining qi, fearing that something would go wrong. This kind of careful action was related to his temperament of not liking to show off, but also related to his situation being different from other cultivators. After so many years, he had almost gotten used to it. Although he set up a blood steal in the copper pillar state, he still planned to quietly develop his power like before, without attracting the attention of others. By the time others noticed, he would have fully grown his wings, and others would no longer be able to make things difficult for him. Unfortunately, the development of the matter had already exceeded his expectations. As early as when he killed Lung Chinga and obtained the 5 Qis unifications, he had already buried a hidden danger. Now, Taoist Master Huda had only uncovered this hidden danger ahead of time. Forget it, let's take one step at a time. After I take the Imperial Teacher's sign and return to the Black Cloud Ridge, I'll discuss it with Li Xiang. Xiao Hua was somewhat at his wit's end. He could only give up for now. At this time, Xiao Hua had already flown out of the Immortal's cave. Turning his head, he didn't see a single cultivator chasing after him, not even a strand of divine sense. Xiao Hua sneered, urging his figure to fly out of the cave. After flying for a while, Xiao Hua saw many cultivators coming towards him. Some entered secluded rooms, but even more people flew towards a fork in the road. Xiao Hua had always kept a respectful distance from the fork in the road. When he flew in earlier, he didn't look at it. Seeing that it was very lively and his divine sense couldn't penetrate it, Xiao Hua stood still and beckoned to a gold core old man. Come here. That gold core old man was stunned. Although he couldn't see Xiao Hua's cultivation, he could hear that Xiao Hua's tone was somewhat unfriendly. He hurriedly flew over and bowed. Junior Jin Hong greets Senior. Does Senior have any instructions? What's in front? Why is it so lively? Xiao Hua pointed at the place Jin Hong wanted to go and asked. Hearing this, Jin Hong hurriedly smiled and said, reporting to Senior, in front is the trade fair. Today is the last day. If we want to use it when we enter the Jade Mountain 3 days later, we must find it today. Therefore, most of the fellow Taoists have come today. I know. You can go. Xiao Hua nodded and waved his hand, indicating that cultivator to leave. The gold core cultivator bowed and left. Xiao Hua looked at the cave in the distance and urged his figure to leave. After all, he didn't lack anything now. Those who came to the Jade Mountain were all gold core and nascent soul cultivators. With their insight, they wouldn't take out something too good for Xiao Hua to take advantage of. Xiao Hua was too lazy to go over. However, when Xiao Hua just flew a few meters, a familiar voice suddenly sounded, Taoist Xiao, aren't you going to the trade fair to take a look? Sir? Xiao Hua frowned. Standing in the air, he turned his head to look. It was Taoist Qing Su who left Taoist Huoda's banquet before him. After seeing clearly, Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, so it was Taoist Qing Su. I thought Taoist had already left. I didn't expect you to still be here. Hee hee. Taoist Qing Su flew to Xiao Hua's side and said with a smile, it's just Taoist Huoda, I don't fear him. However, it's good that I didn't leave. Otherwise, how could I see Taoist Xiao defeating Taoist Huoda with one palm? Taoist Xiao really hid his strength well. Hee hee, I wouldn't dare. Xiao Hua smiled. Taoist Huoda was angry out of humiliation and wanted to vent his anger on others. I only took the blame for someone else. It's all I's fault. I actually let Taoist Xiao take the blame. Taoist Ching Su laughed heartily. He raised his hand and said, Taoist Xiao, please. We'll go to the trade fair. You pick something and I'll apologize to you. No need. Xiao Hua waved his hand. I also feel uncomfortable looking at Taoist Huada. You taught him a good lesson. I just casually taught him a lesson. Hee, Taoist Xiao, do you feel that I's heart isn't sincere enough? Or do you feel that there isn't anything you like in this trade fair? Taoist Ching Su said with a smile, how about I take out my Qingkuan bag? All right. Xiao Hua's heart moved. He thought of something and said with a nod, since you're so sincere, I'll accompany you. Please. Taoist Ching Su smiled and raised his hand. Xiao Hua followed Taoist Ching Su into the immortal cave. While flying, Taoist Ching Su also withdrew his pressure. The others also looked similar to Xiao Hua. After flying into the immortal cave, Xiao Hua glanced around. The entire immortal cave was a bit smaller than Taoist Huada's. However, the advantage was that the two immortal caves were connected together. It was quite spacious. At this moment, there were already quite a few people in the immortal cave. However, these people were still rather sparse. After all, this wasn't a large-scale trade fair. Taoist Xiao, where should we start? Taoist Ching Su asked softly as he saw Xiao Hua land. Xiao Hua casually pointed and said, let's start from here. Here? Taoist Ching Su was slightly stunned. These are items used by Jindan cultivators, right? Yes, what's wrong? Nothing, please. Taoist Ching Su smiled without saying anything and followed behind Xiao Hua. It was just like the trade fair at midnight in Century City. In just a moment, Taoist Ching Su didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Hua was like an old lady buying vegetables in the market. He was interested in everything he saw and would ask about it, but he just didn't buy it. How could he be a fourth-level elemental energy grandmaster? However, Taoist Ching Su couldn't tell whether Xiao Hua was doing it intentionally or not. He could only restrain his temper and accompany him. Unfortunately, after another incense stick of time, Xiao Hua still didn't sell anything. He was really shopping. Chapter 3588. After watching from the side for a long time, Master Ching Su finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Master Xiao, if you're interested, just release your divine sense. Not to mention one stall, even 10 stalls can be seen at once. Why do you have to ask them one by one? If you're not a fish, how can you know the joy of a fish? Xiao Hua disdained. Indeed, he couldn't happily stroll around the trade fair with Master Ching Su. All right. Master Ching Su nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Xiao Hua glanced at Master Ching Su. He also couldn't figure out what this cultivator meant. When Xiao Hua glanced sideways at Taoist Master Ching Su, he saw some jade bottles on the table in front of a golden core cultivator. Below the jade bottles, there were a few joints. These bones couldn't be easily seen by divine sense. This was also the reason why Xiao Hua carefully checked each stall. Fellow Taoist, please. Xiao Hua walked to the cultivator's table and cupped his hands. That golden core cultivator glanced at Xiao Hua and Master Ching Su behind him. He couldn't see through Xiao Hua's cultivation. Xiao Hua's temperament was gentle like jade, making the cultivator feel that his cultivation was similar to his own. However, Master Ching Su beside Xiao Hua was different. Although he couldn't see through his cultivation, Master Ching Su's eyes were like lightning and his aura was like a king. The golden core cultivator immediately felt that Master Ching Su was hiding something. If Master Ching Su was like this, how could Xiao Hua in front of him be inferior? That golden core cultivator didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly stood up and bowed, I don't dare. May I know which item Senior likes? Xiao Hua originally wanted to loosen the reins only to grasp them better. Now, this jade bottle didn't need to be looked at. It must be some medicine for injuries. This kind of thing was meaningless to nascent soul cultivators. If Xiao Hua asked again, it would only make it more conspicuous. Forget it. Xiao Hua reached out and pulled the jade bottle away. He picked up the bones below and asked, Where did you get this thing? How do you want to exchange it? This thing? The golden core cultivator was stunned, and so was Taoist Master Ching Su. After all, on the golden core cultivator's table, apart from some jade bottles, there were also a few pieces of refining materials. Taoist Master Ching Su did not think that these bones were of any use. The golden core cultivator's face was slightly red as he hurriedly said, "Senior, I picked these up from the reef when I was traveling in the South Sea. When I took out the jade bottle from my small Chinkuan bag, I poured them all out and didn't have time to clean them up. If Senior wants it, feel free to take it." "All right." Xiaohua didn't hold back. With a flip of his hand, his knuckles disappeared. Then he raised his hand again and took out a jade bottle. He said, "This is the mysterious Yin pill. It's the best for consolidating one's spiritual sense. It's suitable for golden core cultivators." Many thanks, Senior." The golden core cultivator was overjoyed. He reached out to receive the jade bottle and stammered his thanks. Xiaohua smiled and said, "If you can tell this old man the location of the reef, that would be even better." Of course. The golden core cultivator hurriedly put away the jade bottle. After thinking for a while, he took out a jade pen and wrote something on it. Then he respectfully handed it to Xiaohua. Xiaohua took it and nodded. He put it away and walked to another place. Spiritual Master Ching Su followed for a while. He couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Spiritual Master Xiao, what's the use of these bones?" "Nothing." Xiaohua said indifferently, "This Xiao likes strange things. Who knows if there's some big secret hidden inside?" Spiritual Master Ching Su naturally knew that Xiaohua wasn't telling the truth. He smacked his lips and was about to ask more when he saw Xiaohua quicken his pace and rush to another jade table. Xiaohua's gaze once again fell on a very inconspicuous material. After another half an incense stick's worth of time, Xiaohua had visited many stalls and bought many things. Taoist Master Ching Su, who was at the side, saw clearly that Xiaohua was buying things that others didn't want. Even with his own eyes, he couldn't see the purpose of these things. Damn it, this Xiaohua is really strange. Spiritual Master Ching Su muttered. What does he mean? Could it be that these things are all treasures? But why can't this old man see them? Just as Taoist Master Ching Su was thinking, the cave entrance became noisy again. Xiaohua and Taoist Master Ching Su turned to look and saw that there were actually quite a few nascent soul cultivators at the entrance of the cave. Their faces were filled with excitement as they walked towards the other side of the cave while whispering in low voices. "Oh, aren't these cultivators attending the banquet in Spiritual Master Huada's cave?" Spiritual Master Ching Su asked curiously. "Didn't that guy say that he would hold a trade fair after the banquet?" Xiaohua sneered. "He wanted to, but I'm afraid he wouldn't have the face to do it again." Hee, it's true." Spiritual Master Ching Su laughed. He looked around and suddenly transmitted his voice. "Spiritual Master Xiao, I've been following you for a long time. To be honest, I want to talk to you about something." "So you want to talk about something?" Xiaohua smiled and transmitted his voice. "This Xiao thought you were going to pay for this Xiao." Hee, paying the bill is not a problem. As long as fellow Taoist Xiao likes it, this one will definitely buy it. Spiritual Master Ching Su smiled. "What I said earlier also counts. I don't need you to pay for this Xiao." Xiaohua stopped and looked at Spiritual Master Ching Su. "You only need to answer one, or two questions. If it involves secrets, can I choose not to answer?" "Of course." Xiaohua nodded. "But rest assured, fellow Taoist, I won't make things difficult for you." "That's good. Fellow Taoist, please speak. Do you know about heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence?" Heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence. Spiritual Master Ching Su was obviously stunned. He shook his head naturally. "I have never heard of it." "Oh, then forget it." Xiaohua waved his hand. This thing was one of the things that Xian Songzi used to cultivate his scattered soul. Since Spiritual Master Ching Su didn't know about it, he probably didn't know about the other rare things either. "What about the other question?" Spiritual Master Ching Su was somewhat unwilling and transmitted his voice again. Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and smiled. "The second question is, where are the heavenly soul, earthly soul, and mortal essence?" Hee. Spiritual Master Ching Su slapped his forehead and laughed. This old man shouldn't have asked. However, what's the use of this thing? Where did fellow Taoist Xiao learn about it? If this old man knew, perhaps I could help you. Xiaohua raised his foot and walked forward again. He said, if fellow Taoist doesn't know, then forget it. There's no need for fellow Taoist to worry about what this thing is for. Fellow Taoist, perhaps you don't know. Even if I don't, I can help you ask. Even if fellow Taoist wants to know something else, I can still help you. Spiritual Master Ching Su hurriedly transmitted his voice again. Xiaohua didn't understand. He smiled and said, what do you mean, fellow Taoist? Spiritual Master Ching Su also smiled and said, could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao has already forgotten what I said at Spiritual Master Huada's banquet? What did fellow Taoist say at the banquet? Xiaohua looked at Spiritual Master Ching Su thoughtfully, as if he was recalling what Spiritual Master Ching Su said just now. Seeing that Xiaohua was pretending to be deaf and mute, Spiritual Master Ching Su smiled and said, Spiritual Master Xiao, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. Let this old man ask you, fellow Taoist, have you met any Taoist seniors above the 5th stage of origin power? Or perhaps, fellow Taoist master. Fellow Taoist, there's no need to worry about my master. Xiaohua's tone was somewhat cold. Spiritual Master Xiao, please don't misunderstand. Spiritual Master Ching Su hurriedly explained, I have never doubted fellow Taoist's identity as a Taoist cultivator. Moreover, I also believe that fellow Taoist doesn't have any relationship with Confucian cultivators. What I mean is, fellow Taoist tone is rather arrogant. You actually dare to say, establish a Taoist sect. However, fellow Taoist, don't you feel that your strength is simply insufficient to establish a Taoist sect? Look at the cultivators in this cave. Perhaps each of them isn't fellow Taoist match, but if they join forces, they're enough to kill fellow Taoist, right? Since that's the case, why don't they dare to establish a Taoist sect? Why do they still want to come to Yaodai Mountain? Xiaohua slightly narrowed his eyes. He seemed to understand what Spiritual Master Ching Su wanted to say. Fellow Taoist spirit in establishing our Taoist sect is commendable. Moreover, fellow Taoist cultivation is also truly outstanding. Someone as handsome as fellow Taoist is the hope of our Taoist sect in hidden immortal continent. Seeing that Xiaohua didn't stop him, Spiritual Master Ching Su transmitted his voice. However, fellow Taoist must understand that reviving the Taoist sect isn't the work of a single person. Thousands upon thousands of Taoist sect disciples sacrifice their lives for the Taoist sect's existence in hidden immortal continent today. It's also because of the Taoist sect's seniors' sacrifice over the past tens of thousands of years that you and I are talking in this cave right now. We Taoist sect cultivators should work together and unite with each other. Only then will we be able to stand out. Unfortunately, the Taoist sect's seniors have all withered away. There aren't many who can protect us anymore. It's time for us to walk in front of others. However, when walking in front of others, we need to have a strategy. We also need to protect ourselves first. For someone like fellow Taoist who speaks arrogant words as soon as he appears, I'm afraid he won't live for long. In I's opinion, it's better for fellow Taoist to find a Taoist sect senior who can protect you as soon as possible. Seeing that Spiritual Master Ching Su first talked about establishing the Taoist sect and said that cultivators should unite, Xiaohua agreed from the bottom of his heart. However, when Spiritual Master Ching Su changed the topic and talked about the protection of the Taoist sect seniors, Xiaohua couldn't help but feel disgusted. Ever since Xiaohua started cultivating, he didn't dare to say that he didn't receive any protection. However, how many of the seniors who cared about him sincerely protected him? Many of them had ulterior motives, such as helplessness and affection, and very few of them. Fellow Taoist means, without the seniors' protection, we're helpless? Can we possibly be killed by Confucian cultivators? Xiaohua asked indifferently. Spiritual Master Ching Su's growth was different from Xiaohua's, so he naturally didn't understand what Xiaohua was thinking. However, he also heard the other meaning in Xiaohua's tone. Knowing that Xiaohua had misunderstood, he hurriedly waved his hand and said, "That's not the case. If we were all under Senior's protection, we wouldn't have been able to cultivate to the 4th grade of origin energy. Spiritual Master Ching Su, if you have something to say, just say it. We've all lived for thousands of years. What haven't we seen? Why beat around the bush? Xiao Hua was somewhat impatient. Chapter 3589. Taoist Master Ching Su sighed and looked around again. He had some misgivings and transmitted his voice in a low voice. All right, I actually came to look for other Taoists. I didn't expect to meet Taoist Xiao. Moreover, I'm not familiar with Taoist Xiao, so I was overly cautious. Please forgive me. Xiao Hua nodded. No matter what, I'm a Taoist cultivator. If you have something to say, you can say it directly. Does Taoist Xiao know about Grand Mist Ancestor? Taoist Master Ching Su asked in a low voice with a respectful expression. Xiao Hua was at a loss and shook his head slightly. I've never heard of him. Taoist Master Ching Su was startled. He looked at Xiao Hua from head to toe as if he didn't believe what Xiao Hua said. Xiao Hua's heart thumped. He knew that the person Taoist Master Ching Su was talking about must be an extremely famous Taoist senior on the hidden immortal continent. However, he didn't explain and just looked straight at Taoist Master Ching Su. Hee. Taoist Master Ching Su laughed when he saw Xiao Hua looking at him. He said in a low voice, Taoist Xiao really knows how to joke. Since you've heard this name, you must already know why I'm here. Oh. Xiao Hua's tone was vague and non-committal. I can reveal a piece of information to Taoist Xiao. Ancestor has already escaped. Taoist Master Ching Su's face was full of mystery. Ah! Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and was very surprised. Actually, how would he know who Grand Mist Ancestor was? Where did he escape from? You didn't expect it, right? Taoist Master Ching Su's face was full of pride. Ancestor actually came out alive from the Buddhist, Confucian, and demon seals. In the future, we'll all have someone to rely on. Taoist Xiao, establishing the Taoist sect, isn't something you can do alone. It's also not something a 4th grade Essence Chi disciple like you can do. As long as you rely on Ancestor, no, it can't be called relying on Ancestor. As long as you act according to Ancestor's arrangements, the entire hidden immortal continent of our Taoist sect is just a chessboard. With Ancestor's approval, our Taoist sect will definitely regain its glory. Boom! Taoist Master Ching Su's words were like a thunderbolt that struck Xiao Hua. He instantly thought of the voice in the West Sea. Thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua probed, fellow Taoist, that is Mahavirakana's Buddhist edict? Also, with so many seals, how did the old ancestor get out? So what if there are more seals? Taoist Master Ching Su said proudly, Ancestor Primordial Mist Cultivation is profound. Even if he was imprisoned by a demon formation, protected by the yin-yang illustration mirror, and suppressed by the Mahavirakana Buddha's edict, he could still escape. Hiss! Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He finally understood who was released from the eye of the West Sea when he had just arrived at the hidden immortal continent. Then again, thinking about the Grand Mist Ancestor's ruthlessness when he had tried to escape, Xiao Hua's heart turned cold. Perhaps the Grand Mist Ancestor was powerless to bring him out, or perhaps he had been suppressed for who knows how many years and longed for freedom, but he couldn't just leave him in the eye of the sea, right? What benefits would he get from following such a Taoist senior? Moreover, according to Taoist Master Ching Su, the Grand Mist Ancestor still didn't know how to play up the story of his escape. Therefore, Huang Xiaolong was definitely not a character in the Grand Mist Ancestor's story. If Huang Xiaolong appeared in front of the Grand Mist Ancestor, how would the Grand Mist Ancestor deal with him? Forget it. Xiao Hua's mouth was bitter. He didn't dare to put his life in the hands of others. Since fellow Taoist knows about the Grand Mist Ancestor, then the matter fellow Taoist asked just now, he must also know about it. Taoist Master Ching Su saw the change in Xiao Hua's expression and thought that Xiao Hua was pondering. He took the opportunity to say, I will immediately tell fellow Taoist once I have the results. Of course, if the ancestor has these things, he will certainly bestow them to you. Don't worry, the ancestor is very fond of disciples like you and me who are at the upper 4th grade of Essence Force. Xiaohua's eyes turned slightly and he had a plan in his heart. After all, the Grand Mist ancestor had only seen his face and didn't know his name. It would be fine if he didn't meet with him in the future. Moreover, an acquaintance might not be able to see through a person's nature. Perhaps he should observe for a while longer. After all, this Grand Mist ancestor was a Taoist senior, and even if he was a heartless person, it would be a good thing if he could help Huang Xiaolong support the Taoist sect. And then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist with this matter. Xiaohua nodded. Taoist Master Qing Su was overjoyed and transmitted his voice. Obtaining fellow Taoist Zhao's favor is comparable to Taoist Huada and the other two. Ai's trip was not in vain. Fellow Taoist Master Qing Su, there's no need for this. Xiaohua waved his hand. Whether it's fellow Taoist, I, or even the Grand Mist ancestor, we are all Taoist cultivators. When facing Confucian cultivators, we should all stand together. Taoist Master Qing Su nodded. After the Jadestage meeting, I will immediately report to the ancestor and ask him to send someone to receive fellow Taoist. Receive? Xiaohua frowned and shook his head slightly. Fellow Taoist Master Qing Su wants me to meet the ancestor and personally pledge my loyalty? Yes. Taoist Master Qing Su said with a smile. Our Taoist sect uses very few resources on the hidden immortal continent. If fellow Taoist doesn't pledge your loyalty to the ancestor, how can the ancestor be at ease? Then forget it. Xiaohua said with a smile. Those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. I don't intend to pledge my loyalty to anyone, no matter what their cultivation is. Shu. Taoist Master Qing Su hurriedly whispered, Taoist Master Xiao, it's better to speak less of such arrogant words. The ancestor doesn't like it. Fellow Taoist, please. Just pretend you never saw me. Xiaohua raised his hand and gestured. Taoist Master Qing Su hesitated for a moment and said with a bitter smile, with fellow Taoist temper, I really don't know how you manage to cultivate to the late stage of nascent soul. I have a Taoist heart, a Taoist foundation, and even more a lofty character. Xiaohua said proudly, I also have a great ambition to establish my Taoist sect. Even the heavenly Tao will help me. All right. Taoist Master Qing Su thought for a moment and said, I will report this matter to the ancestor. However, I don't know how the ancestor will answer or how to deal with fellow Taoist matter. Of course, fellow Taoist can rest assured. No matter what, fellow Taoist Xiao is still a disciple of our Taoist sect. Even if fellow Taoist isn't used by the ancestor will only help him and definitely won't make things difficult for him. And I understand. Xiaohua nodded. Also pass my greetings to the ancestor. I also hope that he can lead the Taoist sect cultivators to stand at the peak of the hidden immortal continent. Alright, I will take my leave now. Taoist Master Qing Su flipped his hand and took out a small jade plate. He handed it over to Xiaohua and said, This is I's communication jade image. If fellow Taoist has any matters, feel free to look for me. Communication jade image? Xiaohua received it very curiously. This was also refined by the ancestor. It's an ancient communication technique. Fellow Taoist only needs to activate your magic power and you will know the secret inside. Taoist Master Qing Su smiled slightly. Xiaohua's eyes turned and he said with a smile, Fellow Taoist seems to have promised to give me a magic treasure just now, right? Taoist Master Qing Su blinked his eyes and replied, Is that so? Did this old man promise? What do you want? Give me the jade slip to refine this item. Xiaohua said with a smile. You know how to refine tools? Taoist Master Qing Su's eyes lit up. Xiaohua said with a smile, I know a thing or two. Great. Taoist Master Qing Su clapped his hands and said, There are very few Taoist cultivators in my hidden immortal continent who can refine items. With Taoist Master Zhao's help, great things can be done. All right, I will make a deal with fellow Taoist. And you can also say that I am making a deal with the ancestor. Xiaohua said with a smile, I can refine items for the ancestor, but all the materials will be provided by the ancestor. My reward is that the ancestor must protect my safety. Moreover, I want 20% of the materials used to refine the items. Haha, I don't dare to agree to this. Moreover, I don't have the jade slip to refine the communication jade image. Let me return and ask the ancestor first. However, fellow Taoist, don't worry, the ancestor should agree. Taoist Master Ching Su seemed to be very happy. Xiao Huan nodded and put away the communication jade image. He cupped his hands and said, I believe fellow Taoist can send messages to me through this communication jade image. Now, I won't delay fellow Taoist's great cause of revival. Farewell. Farewell. Taoist Master Ching Su smiled and cupped his hands. He watched as Xiao Hua walked towards another stall and haggled with an early Jindan cultivator. Then, with a smile on his face, he turned and blended into the crowd and disappeared. Looking at some materials in front of him, Xiao Hua didn't pay attention to what was behind him. Currently, he was somewhat uncertain in his heart. The cooperation with this so-called Grand Mist ancestor was also an impromptu idea. After all, Taoist Master Ching Su was right. Even if he had a whole body of iron, how many nails could he forge? When he could borrow strength, he still needed to borrow strength. Anyway, he was refining items and exchanging with this Grand Mist ancestor. It didn't involve any karma. Fellow Taoist. Just as Xiao Hua was pondering, a slightly hoarse voice sounded in his ear. Have you taken a fancy to this spirit fruit? Oh. Xiao Hua came back to his senses. He was fiddling with a few materials that weren't considered rare, but his hand unconsciously picked up a dark fruit the size of a thumb. Xiao Hua simply picked it up and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist. Seeing this cultivator in front of him, Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. This cultivator wasn't tall and wore a dark blue armor. His face was covered by a helmet and couldn't be seen clearly. However, Xiao Hua had a very familiar feeling from the bottom of his heart. This cultivator wasn't a human. Perhaps I should call you fellow Taoist. Xiao Hua said with a smile. What's this called? What's its use? The cultivator's voice was slightly surprised, as if he didn't expect Xiao Hua to see through his true appearance. However, seeing that Xiao Hua didn't intend to expose him, he calmed down and explained, this is a snake-eye fruit. It's a commonly used healing item by snake demons in the Thousand Demons sacred territory. It has a miraculous effect on cultivators' injuries. If fellow Taoist wants to participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering, it's best to buy a few. In my opinion, it's more useful than your Tao Sex spirit pills. Fellow Taoist is a demon of the Thousand Demons sacred territory? Xiao Hua looked around and lowered his voice. Since this demon covered his appearance, he obviously had some misgivings. Xiao Hua didn't speak loudly. I am indeed a demon of the Thousand Demons sacred territory. The demon nodded and calmly admitted. Chapter 3590. I Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua said straightforwardly, do you have anything else here? As long as it's in the Thousand Demons sacred realm, I want it. The demon was a bit surprised. After thinking for a while, he took out a small Qinquan bag and handed it to Xiao Hua. Immortal friend, take a look. Is there anything suitable? Xiao Hua took it and scanned it with his spiritual sense. There were many strange things inside, and many spirit fruits that he had never seen before. Thus, he nodded and said, not bad, they are all suitable. How do you want to trade these things? Do you want primeval stones or pills? Of course it's primeval stones. The demon was simply overjoyed. Looking at Xiao Hua's small Qinquan bag, he said in a low voice, Immortal friend Xiao is indeed a straightforward person. Immortal friend can give these things for 50 top-grade primeval stones. TSK. Xiao Hua smacked his lips and shook his head. Immortal friend, you underestimate me too much. Although I like rare things, I'm not an idiot. The demon smiled embarrassedly. After thinking for a while, he said, then 40. These things might not be worth it, but I spent a lot of effort to bring them here from the Thousand Demons sacred realm. I have to earn some hard-earned money, right? And I'll let it go this time. After all, it's my first time. If it was the Xiao Hua of the past, he would probably haggle. However, thinking about the primeval stones in the space, Xiao Hua gave up and said generously, Thank you, immortal friend. Thank you, immortal friend. Even so, The demon was unexpectedly happy. After Xiaohua gave the primeval stones to the demon, Xiaohua smiled and said, "Immortal friend, I'll ask one more question. Did you bring these things from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm yourself?" The demon put away the primeval stones and said with a smile, "My name is Ingpa. Immortal friend can call me by my name." "What immortal friend, I feel awkward hearing it." "Hee, then you can also call me Taoist Master Xiao," Xiaohua said with a smile. Ingpa hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "So it's Taoist Master Xiao. I've been rude." "No need to be so polite." Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Currently, nascent soul cultivators are everywhere on this Yaotai mountain, and gold core cultivators are as numerous as dogs. Who am I to you?" As soon as he said this, Ingpo was stunned for a long time. Then, the armor on his body shook violently, as if he was trying to hold back a smile. After a while, he cupped his hands and said, "Spiritual master is really a master. This one has been enlightened." Let's return to this Xiao's question first. Xiaohua said with a smile, "Perhaps we can have an even bigger deal." Ingpo's eyes lit up as if he had understood something. He hurriedly asked, "What do you mean by that?" "My strength is weak, so it is impossible for me to travel from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm to the hidden immortal continent in such a short period of time. Thus, I contacted some of my fellow clansmen in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. My fellow clansmen are also similar in strength to me. I don't dare to do big things, so I can only do small things. What other good things do you have that you haven't taken out yet?" Xiaohua nodded his head, thought for a moment and asked. Ingpa knew that Xiaohua was testing him. He hurriedly took out an even smaller Qinkuan bag and handed it over to Xiaohua, saying, "Spiritual Master Xiao, this is all that I have brought this time. Please take a look and see if there is anything you want." As expected, you have good things hidden away." Xiaohua laughed. When his divine sense swept over the small Qinkuan bag, the smile on his face became even wider. He nodded and said, "Although I have no use for most of these things, in order to show my sincerity, I will take all of them." As he spoke, Xiaohua put away the things, took out a considerable amount of primeval stones, put them into the small Qinkuan bag, and handed it back to Ingpo. Ingpo was overjoyed when he saw it. He looked around and said with a smile, "I have received spiritual master's sincerity. Tell me, what do you need me to do?" "Nothing else. I only want you to sell me the spirit fruits, spirit wood seeds, materials for artifact refinement, and so on from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Anything that can be used by the disciples of my Taoism can be sold to me." Xiaohua said with a smile, "Especially the white bones and other items in your cosmos sack. I really like them." "Really?" Ingpa beamed with joy. That kind of smile could be felt even through the helmet. Xiaohua said indifferently, "What? Do you think I am joking with you?" "Oh no." Ingpa hurriedly waved his hand. "I just feel that, you feel that it is inconceivable that I want these things?" "Indeed." Ingpa answered honestly, "My demon realm has many magical things. For example, this ordinary snake eye fruit is extremely beneficial for the recovery of the human race's physical body. There is also the life-extending fruit. It is said that it can extend a human's life by 10 years. Others are looking for me to trade these things, but spiritual master wants ordinary things. This makes me feel that it is inconceivable. And I also want those things." Xiaohua was happy in his heart and said with a smile, "As long as you have something in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, you can give it to me. I will not treat you unfairly. Oh, if you have any cultivation methods, maps, and so on, you can also give it to me. In short, you have many people of the same race. You must have these things that others don't use. You can still take them. Why don't you give them to me?" But Ingpa nodded. He extended a hand and said solemnly, "Let's make an oath." But Xiaohua extended his hand and lightly touched Ingpo's hand. He saw that Ingpo's hand seemed to be webbed, which looked very strange. "How do I find spiritual master?" Ingpa felt at ease and asked. Xiaohua took out a communication talisman and handed it to Ingpa, saying, "My cave is in the Black Cloud Ridge near Yu Province's Bronze Pillar country. You can go there to find me." This is my communication talisman. However, it needs to be activated with Dao Sec's magic power. I don't know if you demons can use it. Spiritual Master, please don't worry. I have a way. Ingpa smiled and took the communication talisman. Xiao Hua's heart moved. He raised his eyebrows and said, "If you have a message from the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm, you can give me the map and cultivation method as soon as possible." Of course. Ingpa nodded, but then shook his head. "But the cultivation method that Spiritual Master wants. I won't hide it from Spiritual Master. The cultivation method of my demon race has always been passed down by word of mouth. It's not written in words. The cultivation method that can be written on beast skin is actually not a real cultivation method. You don't need to worry about this. Just give it to me." Xiao Hua was about to leave, but after thinking for a moment, he took out a small Qianquan bag and handed it to Ingpa, saying, "This is the deposit for this old man. Take it. Don't let your fellow clansmen think that this old man is cheating you." Ingpa took the small Qianquan pouch and looked at it. He stood there blankly for a moment, then solemnly put it into his bosom. He said, "I'll let Taoist know that in fact, the vow has already been made, but Taoist has taken out so many primordial stones, which really makes me admire you. Spiritual Master, please don't worry. I'll go out now and try to send the first batch of things after the Jade Pavilion meeting." "Good." Xiao Hua cupped his hands. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Ingpa did what he said. He simply packed up his things, cupped his hands to Xiao Hua and hurriedly left. Xiao Hua continued to wander around. However, his original appearance had already changed. When he entered the Yuanian cultivator's half of the Immortal's Cave, he had already become a completely different person. The Yuanian cultivator's Immortal's Cave was obviously a lot emptier. There were also a lot fewer things. However, the atmosphere in this half of the Immortal's Cave was far better than the other half. Because almost all the Yuanian cultivators were whispering about what happened at Spiritual Master Huada's banquet. Xiao Hua lowered his head and carefully listened. However, after a moment, he understood that it was really as Spiritual Master Qing Su said. Spiritual Master Huada was humiliated by Xiao Hua. He really couldn't continue the banquet. He pretended to be drunk and retreated. His disciples hurriedly came out and apologized to everyone. Then, they wanted to invite everyone to drink. After a while, many cultivators said goodbye and left. The auction that Spiritual Master Huada mentioned was never mentioned again. Previously, at the banquet, many people didn't dare to inquire too much about Xiao Hua. However, after leaving Spiritual Master Huada's cave, everyone had fewer scruples. About Xiao Hua was immediately inquired by everyone. Although it was only killing a country's state preceptor and prime minister's father, which wasn't too much of a bragging matter, but Taoist cultivators had been bullied by Confucian cultivators for a long time. This kind of matter was also talked about enthusiastically. Xiao Hua's ears were filled with the matter of him killing Leng Qingge and Yan Zhijing. If everyone had told the truth, it would have been fine. However, the more people talked about it, the more the matter would surpass the truth. Even when Xiao Hua heard it, he also felt that this incomparably valiant hero was not him at all. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He looked at the auction and didn't see anything special. Most of the items were medicine and old magic treasures. He lost interest and turned to walk back to where he came from. After walking like this for a while, just as he was about to leave, an old man hurriedly came in. He looked around and walked to the side of an empty jade table. He raised his hand and took out a small Qianquan pouch. He took out a few things and placed them outside. Xiao Hua's eyes lit up and he hurriedly walked over. At the same time, on the other side of Xiao Hua, a Yuanian cultivator casually glanced over. Like Xiao Hua, he quickly sped up and rushed over. As soon as the cultivator moved, Xiao Hua immediately noticed. He flew towards the old man with a flying technique. When the cultivator saw that Xiao Hua was faster than him, he turned his eyes and raised his hand. A gust of wind whistled down and grabbed at a broken mirror in front of the old man. Xiao Hua frowned and coldly snorted. He waved his Taoist robe. With a loud bang, a force appeared around the old man and immediately broke the gust of wind. Ah! The old man was clearly stunned. He had just stood still and didn't even see the situation around him clearly. Rays of light flashed around him, catching him unprepared. Xiaohua didn't even sway. His footsteps were still the same. In a moment, he stood in front of the old man's jade table. He raised his hand and picked up the broken mirror. He looked at the cultivator who was just sent flying by his sleeve. What are you doing? The cultivator's face was a bit pale. He took a few steps back and the blood in his body surged. After a moment, he calmed down and hurriedly shouted. Chapter 3591. Xiaohua disdainfully glanced at the cultivator and coldly said, "This old man won't do anything. This old man just wants to take a look at this little mirror. You dare to snatch the magic treasure from I?" The cultivator was flustered and exasperated. "I saw it first." Xiaohua ignored the cultivator. He looked down at the small mirror in his hand and asked the old man, "Fellow Taoist, how much do you want to trade for this?" The old man hesitated. He'd never imagined that this inconspicuous damaged magic treasure would actually cause competition, and he couldn't think of a way to raise the price for it. Does fellow Taoist want origin stones, magic treasures, or medicinal pills? Xiaohua asked indifferently. Reverend Shifan. The other cultivator had already walked over at this time. He fiercely glared at Xiaohua and said to the old man, "I am Reverend Chu Feng from Jingluan Mountain in the Jing province. I am an old acquaintance of Fairy Su Ming from the Ji province. This item is very important to me. I hope you can trade this item to me." When Reverend Shifan heard Reverend Chu call out his name and mention Fairy Su Ming, his expression changed slightly. Xiaohua at the side could clearly see that this Taoist master Shifan seemed to be very afraid of Fairy Su Ming. But Taoist resting sail was somewhat hesitant. This fellow Taoist already has this item in his hands. After all, this is the rule of the bazaar. What are the rules of the trade fair? Taoist Master Chu Feng said coldly, "The rules of the trade fair are not to bully the weak, nor is it to force people to buy or sell. Fellow Taoist, you don't plan on selling this item, so it's reasonable for anyone to come. If you don't intend to sell it, why put it on the jade table?" Xiaohua naturally would not let go. Without waiting for Reverend Shifan to speak, he immediately said, "Reverend Shifan, there is no need to pay attention to him. How are you going to sell this item?" Apologies. Unfortunately, without waiting for Taoist resting sail to open his mouth, Taoist Chu Feng called out again, "Taoist resting sail isn't prepared to sell it, so naturally, there won't be a price, right? Don't you think so, spiritual master rest sail?" Taoist Master Chu Feng's words were clearly raised. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was threatening Taoist rest sail. That is indeed the case. Fellow Taoist, please return this item to I. I took this item by mistake. This item is not for sale. Reverend Rest Sail gritted his teeth and said. Xiaohua was very reluctant to part with this small mirror because this small mirror was very similar to the IC mirror. When he held it in his hand, a familiar feeling came from his hand. Xiaohua was almost certain that this was one of the fragments of the Kunlun mirror. Currently, Xiaohua did not have any magic weapons that were suitable for him. If he could complete the Kunlun mirror, it would indeed be of great help to him. Sigh. Xiaohua sighed, then swept his gaze over the overbearing Taoist Chu Feng before saying to Taoist Rest Sail, "Fellow Taoist, don't be afraid. This item is extremely important to me as well. You only have to say what you want to trade, and I'll definitely give it to you as long as I have it." Sorry. Reverend Shifan seemed to have understood and shook his head. This old man indeed did not intend to sell this item. Fellow Taoist, please return this item to this old man. At this time, half of the cultivators in the Immortal's Cave noticed this, and everyone looked at Xiaohua at the same time. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes as he looked at Reverend Shifan and Taoist Chu Feng beside him. Especially Taoist Chu Feng, his brows slightly raised as he took half a step back. He activated the magic power around him and was slightly on guard. Xiaohua looked around again. Although there were many cultivators in the Immortal's Cave, none of them were Xiaohua's match. Even if Xiaohua put the small mirror into his space, threw out some origin stones, and left calmly, perhaps no one had the ability to stop him. However, looking at the small mirror in his hand and then looking at Reverend Shifan, Xiaohua asked coldly. Reverend Shifan, this old man will ask again. Do you really not intend to sell this item? Reverend Shifan's heart skipped a beat. Although Xiaohua did not completely release his aura, Reverend Shifan had already sensed it. Thinking about how Xiaohua had casually stopped Taoist Chu Feng before, how could Reverend Shifan not know how powerful Xiaohua was? Unfortunately, Reverend Shifan pondered for a moment before firmly shaking his head. That's right. I indeed did not intend to sell this item. Good, good, good. Xiaohua cheered 3 times and placed the small mirror on the jade table before saying, this item has no fate with me, and you all also have no fate with me. Fine, fine, fine. Seeing Xiaohua let go, Reverend Shifan's heart relaxed while Taoist Chu Feng's face was also filled with joy. The surrounding nascent soul cultivators were even more astonished. It was very clear that Xiaohua's cultivation was higher than Taoist Chu Feng's, and even higher than Reverend Shifan's. The item was in Xiaohua's hands, and only Xiaohua did not let go. The two of them were unable to snatch it from Xiaohua's hands. Moreover, this so-called trade fair did not have any real rules. If Xiaohua were to use force, who would be able to stop him? Fellow Taoist. Someone was unconvinced and hurriedly cried out. Clearly, this item was Reverend Shifan who wanted to sell it. Right now, he's being threatened by Taoist Chu Feng. If you take it, you take it? Who dares to say anything? How can this trade fair have so many rules? That's right, that's right. Someone beside him also egged him on. Could it be that fellow Taoist is also afraid of Fairy Su Ming? Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. Justice is in the hearts of the people, and justice is in the heavenly Tao. This trade fair has no rules, but my heart has order. I will absolutely not destroy my order because of other people's disorder. Even more so, I will not lose my own Tao because of other people's tyranny. Xiaohua said indifferently and left without looking back. Idiot! Taoist Chu Feng sneered and said while looking at Xiaohua's back. Many cultivators beside him frowned and pondered over Xiaohua's words. Of course, when the few golden core cultivators not far from this half of the cave heard this, they looked at each other and signaled with their eyes. One of them secretly slipped away. Reverend Shifan, Taoist Chu Feng said with a smile, when this old man returns, I will definitely tell Fairy Su Ming about this matter. Reverend Shifan's mouth was somewhat bitter. He nodded and said, previously I did not intend to sell this item. However, since fellow Taoist is Fairy Su Ming's close friend, I can consider it. However, I don't know if fellow Taoist has a fire-type magic treasure? Or perhaps a powerful innate true flame. His Taoist Chu Feng frowned. Fellow Taoist Shifan, what do you want these things for? Alas, this old man's lifespan is almost up. I heard that there will be spirit items that can extend one's lifespan in this Jade Pavilion conference. This old man has no choice but to go in and take a look. Taoist Chu Feng's eyes turned slightly and he said with a smile, fellow Taoist must have also obtained the secret information of the Jade Pavilion conference. How about this, fellow Taoist? I have all of these items that fellow Taoist mentioned. However, if I give them to fellow Taoist, the two of us may not have enough. How about this, you and I enter together? I can take out these items of extreme yang for fellow Taoist to use. I can also help fellow Taoist obtain the longevity fruit. Fellow Taoist can temporarily lend this item to I for use. After the Jade Pavilion conference, you can formally give it to I. How about it? Oh, at that time, fellow Taoist, I will give fellow Taoist enough primordial stones? Reverend Shifan smiled bitterly. He felt as if he had lifted a rock and smashed it on his own foot. At this time, what else could he do? He could only nod and agree. Not to mention the discussion between the two, Xiaohua rather gloomily walked out of the Immortals' cave used for the Jade Pavilion conference. Wind blew beneath his feet as he flew into the air, directly flying towards his own palace. However, after just flying for a moment, Xiaohua stood in the air again. He turned his head towards a direction and said indifferently, fellow Taoist, what is the meaning of this? Why are you following I? As soon as Xiaohua's voice fell, a faint radiance flashed in the air. A golden core old man appeared in a rather sorry state. He flew in front of Xiao Hua and saluted respectfully, Junior Zhang Chunyang. Previously, I heard Senior's words of, "My mountain is in disorder, but my heart is in order." I was very moved, so I wanted to visit Senior's palace. Since it's a visit, why do you have to be so sneaky? Xiao Hua waved his hand indifferently. If your heart is flawed, why bother others? After saying this, Xiao Hua ignored that cultivator and turned around to leave. The golden core old man looked at Xiao Hua's back. In the end, he didn't dare to chase after him. He could only look at the sky and wave his hand. A faint crane-like mist flew out and disappeared in the air. Xiao Hua didn't directly return to his palace. He looked around and was about to fly towards the tent outside the Yaotai mountain. Unfortunately, before he could approach the tent, Xiao Hua's brows wrinkled again. He stopped in the air and calmly waited for a few breaths. Then he slowly turned his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, is there something wrong? This old man's mood isn't good today. Don't make this old man unhappy." Hee. A voice came from the night sky. Immediately after, a dense brown mist seemed to boil and expand in the night sky. Then, a cultivator wearing black skin-tight clothes appeared from the mist and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, strength is indeed outstanding. You were actually able to discover my boundless dark night. This one really admires you." Confucian cultivation techniques are open and aboveboard. If they're used in a secretive manner, they're naturally inferior. Xiao Hua indifferently replied, "Not to mention this old man, anyone with an open mind would be able to detect it." Hee. Fellow Taoist is indeed a person of the passage. Although your cultivation base is that of a Taoist, your every move has the demeanor of a great Confucian cultivator. Although that cultivator's face wasn't covered, it was actually blurry in the night. Xiao Hua was disinclined to use his divine ability to check. "Fellow Taoist, is there something wrong? My palace master heard fellow Taoist's words. Yao Mountain is disorderly but not orderly. He was quite interested in fellow Taoist and specially sent me to invite fellow Taoist for a while." After saying this, that cultivator raised his hand and took out an invite-like thing. With a wave of his hand, he sent it in front of Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's eyes slightly narrowed. He looked at the invitation in front of him. This was a square bamboo joint. There were fine inscriptions around it. These inscriptions were like pieces of bamboo leaves. Between the bamboo leaves, wisps of clear air gushed out. A wave of fragrance came along with this clear air. In the middle of the bamboo joint, there were 3 large words, Star Lord Hall. These 3 large words were different from the inscriptions around it. If one looked carefully, each stroke condensed a kind of flicker. The edges of each flicker carried starlight. At a glance, this Star Lord Hall looked like 3 falling stars. Chapter 3592. Xiao Hua smiled and flung his sleeve. He didn't accept the invitation and instead sent it to the martial artist. He said solemnly, "I am a Tao sect cultivator. I don't want to make friends with Confucian cultivators. Moreover, the Jade Pavilion Conference will be held in 3 days. If I pay a visit to the Star Lord Palace before that, I'm afraid it will cause a misunderstanding." That martial artist stared blankly for a moment. Looking at the invitation card in front of him, he waved his hand and the invitation card flew back to Xiao Hua. He said, "My palace master only appreciates fellow immortal. This trip is just for tea and conversation. It has nothing to do with the Jade Pavilion Conference." "Fellow immortal, you're wrong." Xiao Hua waved his hand and returned the invitation. He said with a smile, "The ancients said that if you don't accept a melon field, you won't accept a plum tree. Since our hearts are magnanimous, why do we have to do those things that make others suspicious?" "Fellow immortal, you're wrong." The martial artist waved his hand for the 3rd time and returned the invitation to Xiao Hua. He said, "Since our hearts are magnanimous, why do we have to be afraid of other people's suspicions? We just have to do what we think is right. How can other people know?" Xiao Hua stared at the invitation in front of him. He didn't hesitate. He raised his head and said, "There is no scale in other people's eyes, but there is a scale in this old man's heart. There is no weight in other people's hands, but there is a weight in heaven and earth. This old man isn't afraid of other people's suspicions, but this old man's inner demons. This old man is afraid. With that, Xiaohua waved his hand. He didn't touch the invitation and flew up again. He said in a cold voice, "This matter ends here. There can be a first and second time in this world, but there is absolutely no third and fourth time." Seeing the invitation fly back to him and hearing Xiaohua's warning, the martial artist's eyes flashed with a cold light. He opened his mouth and a black qi rolled and annihilated the invitation. A pitch-black flame appeared in the black qi. In a moment, the invitation turned into ashes and a few strands of clear qi fell into the martial artist's hand. The martial artist waved his hand slightly. These strands of clear qi soared into the sky and disappeared in an instant. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. The martial artist sneered. Black qi once again surged out from his body. In just a few breaths, he blended into the night once again. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Almost at the same time, above the heavy red clouds above the foot of Yaotai Mountain, at the summit of Yaotai Mountain, within an elegant palace, several streaks of clear air rushed in. On the wall, a three-colored mist surged, revealing a clear and bright night scene. Within this night scene was precisely Xiaohua's slowly flying back figure. These words were spoken by a middle-aged man with a tall stature, an elegant appearance, and a bulging forehead. This middle-aged man was wearing a scholarly robe and was sitting on a wooden chair. Above him was an old man with white hair and beard. He was holding an ancient book in his hand and reading it with narrowed eyes. Obviously, due to the mist surging on the wall and the influence of this middle-aged man's words, the old man raised his head. Although the old man's face was full of wrinkles, even on his forehead, these wrinkles didn't make people feel that he was old at all. There was only an extremely wise feeling. Not to mention that the old man's eyes were moving, a kind of divine light that could penetrate one's heart and lungs appeared from time to time. The old man glanced at Xiaohua's back on the wall and said with a smile, "Ling Hu, what made you so angry?" Reporting to Hall Master. The scholar called Ling Hu bowed and said, "These days, Subordinate has been trying to find a few suitable helpers among the Taoist cultivators who came to participate in the Yaotai conference. However, after finding a few, I always felt that they weren't suitable. It's either that they were insatiable or that their cultivation was insufficient. Today, it's rare to see a Taoist cultivator who understands the law and etiquette and has the demeanor of our Confucian cultivators." Subordinate ordered people to bring an invitation card from our Star Lord Hall to invite him. However, he actually refused using the excuse of not accepting melons in the field and not accepting a plum under a plum tree. Tell me, how can Subordinate not be angry? How can Taoist cultivators come and go as they wish? This cultivator is actually interesting. What's his cultivation? The interest on the old man's face was greatly aroused. He looked at Xiaohua's slowly flying figure and asked. Subordinate can't tell, but he should be around the 4th grade lower rank of essence energy. Heh, he came for the Yaotai Mountain State Preceptor's contract. The old man chuckled, but all Taoist cultivators have a sharp spirit in their hearts. They want to establish a country, want to make some achievements, and achieve great achievements. Let him suffer a bit of setback and know the power of our Confucian cultivators. He will be convinced. Scholar Ling Hu nodded. Subordinate knows. That year, when Hall Master subdued Taoist Master Huda, it should be like this. When the old man heard this, his brows slightly wrinkled. Scholar Ling Hu immediately knew that his words were wrong and hastily bowed. Subordinate understands. I won't dare mention these words again. And you keep an eye on this cultivator. See where his palace is. In the Yaotai conference 3 days later, you can fully display the power of our Confucian cultivators. Treat this as a test for you. The old man indifferently instructed. Scholar Ling Hu's face showed joy and he hastily bowed. Subordinate thanks Hall Master for bestowing a star general. However, just when Scholar Ling Hu gave his thanks, he saw that in the darkness above the wall, Xiaohua, who had been slowly flying all along, suddenly lifted her head. Her gaze was like lightning, directly looking at the old man and scholar's location. As if she had discovered something, she immediately raised her hand, and an intense brilliance was born. The entire wall became snow-white with a slap. Ah? The old man slightly stared blankly, and Scholar Linghu was even more startled. His eyes unconsciously slightly closed, and by the time they opened their eyes again, the wall had already returned to normal. However, that was in the darkness. Other than the lantern inside the tent, they could no longer see Xiao Hua's figure. Hiss! The old man sucked in a breath of cold air, his eyes flashing with a cold light. This child perhaps has the cultivation of 4th grade upper rank essence energy. Otherwise, he simply would not have been able to discover. Good. Scholar Linghu's eyes showed a kind of eagerness, and he said, Subordinate is most fond of this kind of powerful opponent. If he can become Subordinate Star General, it will be a great help to Subordinate. Ah! The old man laughed aloud. It seems you still want to have him compete with this old man's Star General. Hall Master's Star General is incomparably valiant. Subordinate fears he does not dare compete. Scholar Linghu smiled. However, to be able to capture this person is extremely beneficial to my Star Lord Hall. Thus, Subordinate is willing to try. As you wish. The old man waved his hand. This time's Jade Pavilion gathering is different from before. You must be careful. Do not suffer a backlash from this Taoist cultivator. Oh, right, how is the situation on Taoist Master Huada's side? Yes, Subordinate knows. Subordinate will be careful. Scholar Linghu bowed and said, Just now, a star soldier reported that Taoist Master Huada seemed to have suffered a setback, having been injured by a Taoist cultivator. The banquet can be considered over, but the trade gathering has not been opened. This has a somewhat bad influence on his plans. Which cultivator did it? The old man was quite interested. Was it Taoist Grandmist's Subordinate? Taoist Grandmist's Subordinate did not take action. He merely spoke out to refute Taoist Master Huada, making Taoist Master Huada lose face. That person is called Taoist Master Ching Su, and he seems to know we are being monitored. After he finished speaking, he left, and there was no trace of him. Scholar Linghu explained, because Taoist Master Huada lost face, he wanted to find trouble with a Black Wind Ridge cultivator named Xiao Hua, but that Xiao Hua unexpectedly concealed himself deeply, instantly injuring Taoist Master Huada. Afterwards, he left the Immortal's abode and disappeared. Even if Taoist Master Huada did not recover his face, perhaps that Xiao Hua would have taken action. The old man coldly smiled. Could it be you did not see? This Xiao Hua and Taoist Master Ching Su were singing the same tune, one in the light and one in the dark? Not bad exactly. Scholar Linghu slapped his forehead and said, This Xiao Hua was disrespectful at the start of the toast. As it turned out, it was for the sake of a falling out later. Precisely so. The old man nodded. Although this old man did not know there was such a thing as being disrespectful when toasting, how many people would dare to fall out with Taoist Master Huada at a banquet? If it was not arranged beforehand, would Xiao Hua have dared to make a move? This subordinate has learned. Scholar Linghu bowed and said, Send someone to find out where Taoist Master Ching Su and Xiao Hua are staying, as well as those damned little bastards from Grand Mist on the list. The old man somewhat gnashed his teeth. Usually, this old man would be too lazy to pay attention to other places, but they actually dared to behave atrociously at Yao Mountain. No need. At this moment, an indifferent voice came from the palace. They naturally came to the Jadestage gathering for a purpose. We will deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, and let them slowly reveal their true colors. Immortal emissary? The old man raised his eyebrows and secretly said in his heart. He gave Scholar Linghu a meaningful glance and said, Linghu Pyron, no need to pay attention to these two people. Go and see how the arrangements for the Jadestage gathering are going. This time's Jadestage gathering must be something that Taoist cultivators will not forget for 100 years. Yes, Palace Master, this subordinate will go and check. Linghu Pyron hurriedly bowed and saluted, then quickly walked out. Kong Hongwu greets Lord Immortal Emissary. When Linghu Pyron left, the old man hurriedly got up and turned his head to look at the screen behind him. On the screen was a picture of the Moon Palace. The brilliance of the moon flashed slightly, and a layer of mist appeared. Then, a light green palace dress appeared in the mist. A tall woman stepped on a cloud and descended from the moon. In the blink of an eye, she flew in front of the old man. Although the woman was already standing in front of the old man, the clouds in front of the woman's face blocked the old man's view, so the old man couldn't see her face clearly. However, the old man did not dare to neglect and respectfully saluted. "Take a seat." The woman was not polite. She waved her hand, and a layer of the same faint cloud fell on the chair that Kong Hongwu sat on before. Then, she sat down gracefully and ordered. Kong Hongwu respectfully said, "Many thanks for the seat, immortal emissary." Then he also sat on the chair that Linghu Piran sat on just now. Palace Master Kong. Just as the immortal emissary opened her mouth, she was immediately interrupted by Kong Hongwu. Kong Hongwu hurriedly stood up and said with a smile, "Immortal emissary is joking. It's better to call me Kong Hongwu. I don't dare to be called Palace Master." "Ha, Star-Lord Hall is Star-Lord Hall. Palace Master Kong is in charge of Star-Lord Hall, so you should be called Palace Master Kong. There is nothing wrong with this." The immortal emissary smiled faintly, and the clouds in front of her floated slightly. Chapter 3593. Kong Hongwu hurriedly smiled apologetically and said, "The Palace Master in the Immortal Palace is the real Palace Master. My title is just to fool those Taoist remnants. Others may not know, but how could the immortal emissary not know? As long as you can do what she asked you to do, I don't dare to promise you the position of Palace Master, but I will give you a position in the Immortal Palace to prolong your life by 10,000 years. Thank you, immortal emissary." Kong Hongwu was delighted, but he did not dare to show it. He hurriedly bowed and thanked her. The immortal emissary flicked her sleeve and said, "Take a seat. The Jadestage meeting will begin in 3 days. How many nascent soul cultivators will come? Is your Jadestage mountain ready?" Immortal emissary, there are now more than 700 nascent soul cultivators and more than 6,000 gold core cultivators gathered at the foot of the Jadestage mountain. Kong Hongwu answered without hesitation. However, most of the 700 nascent soul cultivators came for the Green Abyss Dragon Saliva. They are in a wait-and-see mode and may not participate in the Jadestage meeting. As for the other 6,000 gold core cultivators, most of them will participate in the Jadestage meeting. As for the great formation of the Jadestage meeting, please don't worry. Ever since I got your formation diagram, I personally urged the 28 Star Lords to rearrange the great formation of the Jadestage mountain. On the basis of this great formation, the heavenly generals sent by the immortal emissary worked together to set up the sun, moon, and star immortal arrays. Not to mention nascent soul cultivators, even out-of-body and spirit-severing cultivators will not be able to leave alive. That's good. Someone has already reported this to me. Your Star-Lord Palace has done a good job. The immortal emissary nodded. It seems that everything is ready now except for the east wind. Indeed. Kong Hongwu smiled. As long as I open the great formation of the Jadestage mountain in 3 days, we can proceed according to your plan. However, I can't guarantee how many nascent soul cultivators will enter the formation. The immortal emissary chuckled and said, "Kong Hongwu, do you think I'm just drawing a pie in the sky? Look at this. What is this?" As he spoke, the 3 jade boxes landed in the air of the palace. The 3 jade boxes were similar in style and shape. They were all square and several inches in size. They flashed with light, and under the light, the inscriptions were like poems and essays. They were like chains flowing on the surface of the jade boxes. Wisps of clear air came from the inscriptions and fell into the light. Kong Hongwu opened his mouth. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Immortal Envoy, could it be that the words you asked me to spread are true?" "Why wouldn't it be true?" The immortal emissary smiled faintly. "This is the east wind that I was talking about. It's not the east wind that you speak of. But these things are too precious. I feel that it's truly a pity to give them to the remnants of the Taoist sect. If they don't want to, then I'll just make something up." Kong Hongwu looked at the 3 jade boxes with surprise in his eyes and said in a low voice, "Foolish. Short-sighted. The immortal emissary said coldly. If there are no Taoist sect cultivators coming out of the Yaotai mountain with these things, who will believe in the Yaotai gathering in the future? Besides, you said that most of the 700 nascent soul cultivators who came were just spectators. If you don't take these things out, will they come to the Yaotai gathering? But, Kong Hongwu still shook his head slightly. These things are too precious. Even if we take them out, there's no need for them to get them. In the past, many nascent soul cultivators came out empty-handed and didn't get anything. No matter how precious these things are, they are nothing compared to the gift that she gave to the Empress at her birthday banquet. The immortal emissary smiled faintly. Besides, there are very few nascent soul cultivators who can come out of the Yaotai gathering this time. If your Star Lord Palace doesn't take out something, how can the Taoist sect cultivators be convinced? Unless you don't want to be the Star Lord Palace master anymore, unless you don't want to hold the Yaotai gathering anymore. Yes, thank you, immortal emissary, for your consideration. Kong Hongwu nodded, then waved his hand, and 3 jade boxes fell into his hand. However, in an instant, the hand that came into contact with the jade boxes cracked and formed layers of ice shards, while the other hand was suffused with wisps of flames, igniting the true qi in his hand. Kong Hongwu was shocked and hurriedly urged his true qi. After a layer of dark green flashed, all the strange phenomena disappeared. After Kong Hongwu received the 3 jade boxes, he looked at the immortal emissary and probed, I still have 2 questions to ask immortal emissary. Speak. I have just told Linghu Pyron that the Taoist sect's old man Hongmeng has revived, and now he has begun to show off in the hidden immortal continent. That Taoist master Qing Su, Xiaohua, and a dozen gold core cultivators should all be his subordinates. If immortal emissary doesn't let me deal with it, what should I do? Or should immortal emissary bring this news back to the immortal palace and ask immortal general immortal monarch to deal with it? Kong Hongwu asked. The immortal emissary pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, the immortal palace already knows about the Grand Mist Ancestors matter, but I don't know how the immortal emperor will deal with it. In addition, I know a little about Taoist Master Qing Su and Xiaohua. Taoist Master Qing Su has contacted many Taoist sect disciples to submit to the Grand Mist Ancestor. I have already sent people to secretly follow them to see if they can find the Grand Mist Ancestor's trace. If Taoist Master Qing Su is in the dark, then Xiaohua is clear. Although I haven't seen any traces of him contacting the Grand Mist Ancestor, his appearance is very strange. After the Grand Mist Ancestor escaped, he suddenly became famous, and as soon as he came out, he set up a blood steel in the Bronze Pillar country, claiming to establish a Taoist sect. Why would he, a Taoist sect cultivator, establish a Taoist sect? If he didn't have the support of the Grand Mist Ancestor, would he dare to say this? Now that he came to the Jade Pavilion meeting, he must have received the Grand Mist Ancestor's order to snatch the Imperial Preceptor's lot and prepare to help the Jiang country establish a country in Yu province, and find a place for the Grand Mist Ancestor to stay. A crafty rabbit has 3 burrows, but this is it. Then, what should I do? Don't worry about it. Since they want to participate in the Jade Pavilion meeting, let them participate. If they can survive, give them the Imperial Preceptor's lot. As the saying goes, the monk can run, but the temple can't run. Since the Grand Mist Ancestor is establishing a country in Jiang country, are you afraid that you won't be able to find him? Yes, I understand. Of course, ignoring doesn't mean avoiding it. This Xiaohua's aura is very fierce. If there's a chance, don't hold back. The immortal emissary smiled coldly. If you hit the small one, don't be afraid that the old one won't come out. Yes, I know. Kong Hongwu naturally didn't dare to ask more and probed again. The immortal emissary has arranged so many things and paid such a huge price. I still don't understand. The birthday gift she gave to the Emperor-Empress? What is it? It's only 3 days from the Jade Pavilion meeting. Can the immortal emissary solve my doubts? When Kong Hongwu said this, the clouds in front of the immortal emissary's face suddenly froze, and the entire palace turned cold. Kong Hongwu was regretting it at this moment, but before he could speak, the immortal emissary chuckled and said, I thought that Hall Master Kong wouldn't be so curious, but who would have thought that he would actually open his mouth? Sigh, after all, the immortal emissary took out these 3 things that I thought were impossible to take out. How can I not think about it? Kong Hongwu sighed. Forget it, there's no harm in telling you. The immortal emissary laughed. You've done so much for me, if I don't tell you, wouldn't it seem distant? Furthermore, the great formation beneath the Yaodai Mountain? I didn't hide it from Hall Master Kong, so Hall Master Kong will naturally know about it in the future. If the immortal emissary can't say it, then don't say it. Kong Hongwu laughed. There are many difficult questions in this world, and it's impossible for me to know the answers one by one. There's nothing that can't be said. The birthday gift is these nascent soul stage cultivators. The clouds on the immortal emissary's face began to dance again. These nascent soul stage cultivators? Kong Hongwu was stunned. He thought for a long time, and naturally knew that he had to get the truth from these nascent soul stage cultivators, but he never thought that it would be from these nascent soul stage cultivators themselves. Or, to be exact, from these cultivators' nascent souls. Hiss. Kong Hongwu sucked in a breath of cold air, very puzzled. Why do we, Confucian cultivators, need these nascent soul stage cultivators? Furthermore, more than 700 cultivators are 700 nascent soul stage cultivators, so many nascent soul stage cultivators. How can 700 nascent soul stage cultivators be enough? The immortal emissary said indifferently, we need 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators. Late nascent soul stage cultivators are the best. What? Kong Hongwu was naturally prepared, but he was still frightened by this number. He exclaimed, Immortal emissary, are you sure? How many nascent soul stage cultivators can there be in the entire hidden immortal continent? Immortal emissary, how can 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators complete it? This emissary also doesn't know. The immortal emissary smiled bitterly. This emissary can only do his best and get as many as possible. At this point, Kong Hongwu didn't dare to ask another word. The lives of 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators, this kind of shocking wealth was definitely not something Kong Hongwu could get involved in. He really regretted asking so many questions now. Alright, you don't have to think too much. Everything will be the same as the previous Jade Pavilion gathering. Throw the things into the formation and let them fight each other. The immortal emissary waved his hand and prepared to get up. Kong Hongwu hurriedly asked again, Immortal emissary, since there are so many of them, how many Imperial Preceptors lots should we put down? The immortal emissary stood up, and a green cloud appeared under his feet, carrying the immortal emissary into the bright moon. The immortal emissary's words fell in the palace. The specific number is the matter of your Star Lord Palace. This emissary doesn't dare to overstep. You decide for yourself. This emissary only wants to know the final result. Yes, respectfully send off the immortal emissary. Kong Hongwu frowned slightly, bowed, and watched the immortal emissary's back fall into the moonlight and disappear. Alas, 10,000 nascent soul stage cultivators. What kind of birthday gift is this? Kong Hongwu sighed and sat on the chair again. With a wave of his hand, the ancient book fell into his hand, and he began to read it with relish. Xiao Huan naturally didn't know that he had already fallen into the eyes of the immortal emissary, but he had already begun to plan what to do after being noticed by the Confucian cultivator. Before he returned to the palace, he had already swept his soul awareness a few times, but didn't find anything unusual. Only then did he put the token on the door and open the palace. Chapter 3594. Of course, there was no one in the palace. Xiao Hua also understood that it was not only because Chang Yu and the others did not have a token to enter the palace, but more importantly, because he offended Hua Dezhenren. He might be stronger than Hua Dezhenren, but in terms of connections and so on, he was absolutely incomparable. Even, maybe coming out of the Jade Pavilion gathering was the beginning of being chased by Confucian cultivators. How could Chang Yu and the others come back? Xiao Hua did not return to the quiet room. He just sat in the main hall and waved his hand, activating the restriction of the Immortal's cave. His divine sense once again cautiously swept the area, setting up the Du Tian star formation again. Then, he took out the small Qianquan bag he exchanged with Ing Bo. Restraining his slightly excited mood, Xiaohua stretched out his hand and took out a thick white bone from the small Qianquan bag. That white bone was more than 1 zhang tall, sparkling and translucent like jade. No matter if it was divine sense or Buddhist sense, he could not see anything strange about it. Kacha! A thunderbolt was born from the incomplete white bone and hit the white bone. The white bone floated along with the thunderbolt and fell on the skeleton. The left leg was precisely the missing calf bone. At the same time the white bone fell, lightning water flowed down from the place where the white bone was connected. Good. Xiaohua clapped his hands and smiled. Just based on this calf bone, Xiaohua's trip was already worth it. After that, Xiaohua took out the other items that he had traded with Ing Bo. Ing Bo's items were very miscellaneous and very strange. Many of them should be items from the Thousand Goblins' sacred realm. Xiaohua couldn't figure them out, but if he thought about it with his feet, he knew that they couldn't be anything good. Xiaohua only gave some unknown spirit herbs to Xiaohua to see if Xiaohua could grow them. Then, Xiaohua took out the bone he exchanged with the Jindan cultivator. Looking at it with his soul sense, he was even more overjoyed. There were some soul cultivator soul techniques inside that Xiaohua did not know before. After Xiaohua sent the bone into the mysterious dark cloud and handed it to the soul cultivator Xiaohua, Xiaohua used his hand to pinch his chin and secretly thought, "This white bone is somewhat strange. It seems to be scattered in 2 planes. Previously, I thought only the Xiaoyu continent had it. Later, I found out that the Western Paradise also had it. Now, Ing Bo must have obtained it in the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Since the Thousand Demons' sacred realm has it, presumably, the hidden immortal continent also has it. This white bone, who is it? A celestial being? Also, how could there be a soul cultivator's bone in the hidden immortal continent? Could it be that there were soul cultivators in the hidden immortal continent? But soul cultivators need to consume millet, unless there is another 1 million Meng mountains on the hidden immortal continent. Forget it. Let's talk about it later. This hidden immortal continent is many times larger than the Dawn Rain continent. Previously, this Xiao had only wandered around the Yu region, and only now did he reach the Yaotai mountain. Let's see if we can find Lu Zhen or find the way back to Dawn Rain continent. When he thought up to here, Xiaohua's brows raised as he spoke in surprise. When Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense, a look of joy appeared on his face. He put away the capital star formation and then took out the token from his bosom. A ray of light shone from the token, and the door to the palace opened. Chang Yu and Wu Tianxin quickly walked in from the outside. When the two of them saw Xiaohua sitting inside the palace with a smile, they looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, they walked in front of Xiaohua and knelt down in front of him with a plop sound, and said respectfully, "Junior Chang Yu and Wu Tianxin wish to become disciples of the Imperial Preceptor and work for the Imperial Preceptor's country." Xiaohua was dumbfounded. His hands stopped halfway in the air. He was very happy that Chang Yu and Wu Tianxin had returned. After all, a friend in need was a friend indeed. However, the sudden kneeling of the two of them was out of his expectations. Looking at the sincerity on their faces, Xiaohua smiled. With a wave of his hand, the door to the cave closed. Xiaohua did not let the two of them get up and asked, "What do you mean by this? Why did you suddenly have the thought of becoming disciples of this old man?" Reporting to Senior, Chang Yu said, "Junior came to Yaotai Mountain this time to seize the Imperial Preceptor's lot. Previously, when Junior met Senior, Junior also said that Junior's cultivation had reached a bottleneck. If Junior did not rely on external help, Junior might not be able to break through. Junior wants to become the Imperial Preceptor. Although Junior must rely on the strength of the country to cultivate, more importantly, Junior must find a way out for himself. If Junior's cultivation stagnates at the gold core stage, then Junior can also enjoy glory, splendor, wealth, and rank within the country." However, after Junior met Senior, Senior frankly gave Junior pointers on Junior's cultivation without any intention of treating Junior as an outsider, allowing Junior to feel Senior's breadth of mind. In addition, since Senior wants to establish a country and fight for the imperial preceptor's lot with Junior, Junior's chances will be reduced. Rather than Junior going to fight for it with Senior, Junior might as well directly work for Senior. This is also the reason why Junior did not come when Wu Tianxin and Zhu Chengli came to Senior to ask for benefits. Junior was thinking about how to ask Senior. Hee, no wonder this old man didn't wait for you. It turns out that you were casting a long line to catch a big fish. Xiaohua laughed. Chang Yu's heart relaxed, and he said, actually, Junior originally wanted to wait for Senior to seize the imperial preceptor's lot before bringing it up. But tonight, Senior defeated Taoist Master Huoda, and Junior heard a few nascent soul seniors talk about Senior's deeds. Junior knows that this is a chance for Junior. If Junior does not take advantage of Senior's awkward situation to provide timely assistance, when will Junior wait? Xiaohua nodded slightly, but did not comment, and looked at Wu Tianxin again. Wu Tianxin hurriedly said, presumably, Senior already knows that when Junior was talking to Senior, Junior already had the idea of working for Senior, but Junior is still somewhat hesitant. Junior has the same idea as Senior Martial Brother Chang. Junior does not dare to disturb Senior at this time. Junior wants to wait until after the Jade Pavilion meeting to mention it to Senior. However, just now, after Senior left Taoist Master Huoda's banquet, Senior Martial Brother Chang, Zhu Chengli and Junior discussed. Zhu Chengli said that Senior offended Taoist Master Huoda. Although Senior's strength is greater than Taoist Master Huoda, Taoist Master Huoda will definitely take revenge on Senior. Senior's future is worrying, so Zhu Chengli does not dare to get too close to Senior. At the same time, he advised Junior and Senior Martial Brother Chang not to return to Senior's palace. Junior does not know what benefits Zhu Chengli obtained from Senior, but Junior knows that Junior must come back. Out of Junior's expectation, Senior Martial Brother Chang also wanted to come back. Junior and Senior Martial Brother Chang discussed a little, and both of us have the same idea. How can adding flowers to a brocade compare to providing timely assistance? Junior earnestly asks Senior to accept the two of us. We are willing to work for Senior. Xiaohua nodded slightly. No matter if it was Chang Yu or Wu Tianxin, they were speaking from the bottom of their hearts. They didn't hide anything from him, and they even spoke about their thoughts of betting. Xiaohua thought about their actions. Although he didn't really understand them, people in this world weren't exactly the same. It was normal to have some selfish thoughts. Good. Xiaohua smiled. Since you two have such thoughts, this old man will temporarily accept you two as disciples in name. After this old man examines you two, I will accept you two as disciples. Accept disciples? Wu Tianxin was stunned. Chang Yu was even more stunned. They looked at each other with surprise in their eyes. Xiaohua was even more stunned. His face was somewhat unsightly. Thinking about what the two of them said just now, his heart thumped. That's right, they had always said that they would work for the state preceptor and Senior. They did not say that they would become his disciples. Senior, are you really going to accept us as disciples? Wu Tianxin carefully asked again. Xiaohua blinked his eyes and waved his hand in embarrassment. The Xiao heard wrongly. You wait, we kowtow to master. Unexpectedly, ecstasy appeared on the two's faces. This made Xiaohua even more surprised. He shouted and kowtowed 9 times on the ground. Get up, get up. Xiaohua hurriedly raised his hand and helped the two up. He asked curiously, so you two did not plan to become his disciples? Master? Chang Yu respectfully got up. He looked at Xiaohua strangely and said in a low voice, on the hidden immortal continent, we Taoist cultivators cannot openly accept disciples. We, being able to work for master is already the limit of Confucian cultivators' tolerance. Xiaohua understood. Li Xiang and the others all thought that he knew about this matter. They never mentioned it to him. Xiaohua laughed and waved his hand. The rules of Confucian cultivators were broken by this Xiao. Since this Xiao wants to establish a Taoist sect, what is there to be afraid of? This Xiao even wants to establish a sect. Master, Chang Yu hurriedly said. You can't say this here. This is Yaotai Mountain. And this old man knows. Xiaohua nodded. In this old man's eyes, Yaotai Mountain is just Yaotai Mountain. Wu Tianxin opened his mouth again. Master, since this disciple has become your disciple, then please give this disciple a proper name. This disciple can no longer use his previous name. Xiaohua knew about Wu Tianxin's abnormality and understood that this matter might be related to his life. He thought for a moment and said, "How about Wu Tian?" Wu Tianxin was overjoyed. He knelt down again and said, "Thank you, Master, for giving me a name. From now on, this disciple is Wu Tian." Xiaohua helped him up and said with a smile, "Even if you cultivate to nascent soul, you can still be called Taoist Wu Tian?" "Yes, this disciple understands. This is this disciple's Dharma name." Wu Tian was really happy. This was Xiaohua's promise to him. Chang Yu looked enviously at the side and said in a low voice, "Master, you can't favor one and discriminate against the other. This disciple..." Xiaohua rolled his eyes at him and said, "You guys have just become my disciples. This old man still doesn't know your specific cultivation level. How can I give you any benefits? Especially you've already reached the late stage of Jindan." After the Yaotai gathering, Xiaohua originally said that he didn't know the specific temperament of these two people and that he still wanted to test them. However, when the words reached his mouth, he changed them to cultivation level. At this moment, his heart was even moved. He thought for a moment and nodded. "All right, since you guys can bet on this old man, then this old man will also bet. Chang Yu, you better not disappoint this old man." Chapter 3595. When Chang Yu heard this, he was overjoyed. He hurriedly knelt down and said, "Master, don't worry. Disciple will not disappoint Master's expectations." Then follow this old man to the quiet room. Xiaohua waved his hand and ordered, "Wuwen, you cultivate here." "Yes, Master." Chang Yu was overjoyed. He climbed up from the ground and followed behind Xiaohua. Wu Tian also bowed and said, "Disciple understands. Disciple will protect Master and senior brother." After entering the quiet room, Xiaohua ordered Chang Yu to sit cross-legged. He closed his eyes and stretched out his hand. A very faint crystal thread appeared on his index finger and fell on Chang Yu's dantian. After the time it took to eat a meal, Xiaohua's face was expressionless. He didn't even frown. Chang Yu's heart slightly tightened. "Go ahead, let this old man take a look." Suddenly, Xiaohua spoke. Chang Yu very naturally agreed. "All right." But before cultivating, a trace of hesitation flashed through Chang Yu's heart. After all, he was cultivating in front of Xiaohua. His cultivation method was no longer a secret to Xiaohua. Of course, this kind of hesitation was quickly ignored by Chang Yu. This was only the vigilance of a late gold core stage cultivator. It was also the result of not having a master for hundreds of years. When the cultivation method circulated, Chang Yu quickly entered a tranquil state. The heaven and earth origin energy in the quiet room flowed into Chang Yu's body in an orderly manner. "All right, you can stop now." Chang Yu's cultivation method only circulated a few times. Xiaohua opened his mouth and moved his finger away from Chang Yu's dantian. He said somewhat seriously, "There's a problem with your cultivation method." Chang Yu didn't wait to open his eyes. His face was anxious and he quickly asked, "Impossible, Master. This cultivation method of yours was taken from someone else's hands. It wasn't passed to you by someone else, right?" Xiaohua asked with a smile that was not a smile. Chang Yu didn't hide it and nodded, "Indeed. Moreover, you've been cultivating for many years and have always been in the late gold core stage. You always feel like you're within the bottleneck, but it also doesn't seem to be within the bottleneck, right?" Xiaohua asked again. Chang Yu's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. Wasn't this the reason why he wanted to become Xiaohua's disciple? "Master, please give me some pointers." Chang Yu pleaded. "I'm afraid that your situation can only be easily resolved if you become my disciple," Xiaohua said with a smile. Chang Yu was puzzled and smiled apologetically. "What do you mean, Master? Isn't it obvious? If there is a problem with your disciple's cultivation method, what will you do?" Chang Yu thought for a moment and said, "The simplest way is to change your cultivation method." "Can you change it? Are you willing to part with your late gold core stage cultivation base?" Xiaohua smiled. Disciple really can't bear to do so. However, in the end, this disciple can only sever his wrist. "I'm afraid this is the reason why you want to become the state preceptor, right?" Xiaohua pointed at Chang Yu and said, "If you change your cultivation technique, your lifespan is already insufficient. The simplest and most direct solution to your current predicament is to modify your cultivation method." Chang Yu couldn't suppress the ecstasy in his heart and said in a low voice, "It's not that I haven't thought of this before, but even a late nascent soul stage cultivator wouldn't dare to casually change a golden core cultivation method. Furthermore, how can this disciple believe in a cultivation method that has been modified? What about the cultivation method this old man modified for you? Can you believe it?" Xiaohua looked at Chang Yu with a smile that wasn't a smile and asked. Chang Yu bit his lips, but his eyes were full of joy. That was really an uncontrollable joy. A nascent soul stage cultivator who can modify a golden core cultivation method, what kind of cultivation base is that? Chang Yu was really glad that he made the right bet. This old man has a lot of cultivation methods here, but your own cultivation method is still the most suitable for you. Give the cultivation method to this old man, and this old man will help you modify it during these 3 days of free time. Xiaohua said indifferently. Chang Yu was stunned again and said in a low voice with a smile, "Master, can't you be serious for a bit? Don't be too hasty. This is related to this disciple's future." Chang Yu's words sounded like he was complaining about Xiaohua, but Xiaohua sounded like Lu Yi and Wang Bianfei, the two children, were somewhat coquettishly pleading. It seemed that Chang Yu really thought of himself as Xiaohua's disciple. Looking at Chang Yu's old appearance, Xiaohua stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "It's just a golden core cultivation method. Is there a need to be so serious? Today, this old man's temperament is good. If you want this old man to modify it, then quickly take it out. If you miss this village, you won't have this shop." Yes, this disciple was just joking with Master. Chang Yu didn't dare to neglect and hurriedly took out a jade eye and handed it to Xiaohua. After Xiaohua took it, he didn't modify it himself and casually threw it to the green-robed Xiaohua, then said to Chang Yu, "Go and call Wu Tian in. This old man feels that there are some problems with this hidden immortal continent's cultivation method." "It can't be. Master's meaning is?" Chang Yu understood and asked in disbelief. Xiaohua nodded. "Maybe a Confucian cultivator did something. Let's take a look at Wu Tian's cultivation method." After looking at Wu Tian's cultivation method, Xiaohua frowned. Previously, he really didn't think about this problem, but now, looking at Chang Yu and Wu Tian's cultivation method, there were faint flaws. These flaws were very hidden and ingenious. If those cultivators had never created their own cultivation method or hadn't seen many kinds of cultivation methods, they wouldn't be able to see it, let alone fix it. "Master." Chang Yu naturally knew what Xiaohua was thinking and said in a low voice, "Could it be that this cultivation method was really modified by someone?" Xiaohua nodded slightly. "This old man doesn't know about other people's cultivation methods, but you and Wu Tian's cultivation method must have a problem." "But," Wu Tian said in a low voice, "Hidden Immortal Continent still has many nascent soul seniors." Speaking until here, Wu Tian first mocked himself and said, "Yes, it's impossible to modify all of them, and even if there are many modifications, there must be some left to let people see hope." These Confucian cultivators. Chang Yu gnashed his teeth and said, "They are really ruthless." The struggle between Buddhism and Taoism is not limited to this. Xiaohua naturally knew that Taoism's methods were more ruthless than those of Confucian cultivators, and said with a smile, "There are many things that you don't know. However, since you have entered this old man's tutelage, you don't have to be afraid of these things. This old man will naturally teach you." Saying this, Xiaohua still threw Wu Tian's cultivation method to the green-robed Xiaohua. That guy has seen who knows how many cultivation methods and secret techniques. Modifying these Jindan stage cultivation methods was just a matter of lifting his hand. Afterwards, Xiaohua let the two of them go back and meditate. When the sun rose, he let the two of them come to the quiet room and returned the modified cultivation method to the two of them. After the two of them looked at it, he guided the two of them in their cultivation just like before. 3 days passed very quickly. The two of them were intoxicated as they listened until Xiao Hua stopped. Only then did they wake up. Today was the Yaotai assembly. Xiao Hua got up and said, 3 days have passed. Do you two want to continue cultivating here, or do you want to follow Master to Yaotai Mountain to participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering? Chang Yu and Wu Tian looked at each other, and without hesitation said in unison, reporting to Master, Disciple has already achieved the purpose of this trip. There is no need to participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering. Disciple will comprehend the cultivation method here, and congratulate Master on obtaining the Imperial Teacher's lot and the 3 treasures from Star Lord Palace. 3 treasures? Xiao Hua smiled. Although he didn't know what these 3 treasures were, he understood that it was some kind of gimmick from Star Lord Palace of Confucian cultivators. As Li Xiang said, it was to coax the Taoism cultivators like dogs fighting over bones, so Xiao Hua didn't ask much. At this time, hearing the two talk, he nodded and said, very good, this old man can provide everything you need for cultivation. This old man doesn't need to participate in this Jade Pavilion gathering. After this old man obtains the Imperial Teacher's lot, you two will follow this old man back to Black Cloud Ridge and see this old man's magnificent scenery. Yes, Disciple understands. Disciple will listen to Master's instructions. Chang Yu and Wu Tian respectfully sent Xiao Hua out of the palace. This palace couldn't be opened by divine sense without nascent soul strength. Xiao Hua wasn't here, so Chang Yu and Wu Tian couldn't stay in this palace, and followed Xiao Hua to fly towards Jade Mountain. At this time, it was already dawn, and the 3 people flew at a moderate speed under Jade Mountain. High in the sky, the red clouds were still covering the sky, and they couldn't see the rising sun. Instead, the rolling clouds made people feel a little depressed. Under the red clouds, many cultivators flew out from the palaces, pavilions, and caves, and gathered towards Jade Mountain. Divine scents swept through the air, and it was quite lively. Hiss! Xiao Hua also swept through with his divine sense, and sucked in a breath of cold air. His brows slightly wrinkled and he couldn't help but wonder, why are there so many cultivators? Where did they all come from? Of course, in the air, cultivators were densely packed one after another. Previously, when Xiao Hua came, he didn't feel it, and even at the trade fair, he didn't feel it, but now, this battle array was vast and mighty. Of course, not to mention the items of extreme cold and extreme heat, just the items that can extend one's life by 1,000 years are enough to entice those cultivators who aren't interested in the state preceptor's lot. Chang Yu said with a smile, and finally spoke about the treasures of Jade Mountain's Star Lord Palace. Oh! Xiao Hua understood, but he didn't care, and said with a smile, looks like Star Lord Palace spent a lot this time. Other than the state preceptor's lot and the rarities of Jade Mountain, there are also the items of extreme cold, extreme heat, and life extension, 3 treasures. Confucian cultivators are attracted to our Taoist cultivators. The items of extreme cold and extreme heat are the best for tool refining and cultivation, and the life extension items can even give senior martial brother Chang and other Taoist disciples who have no hope of conceiving a nascent soul an opportunity out of thin air. Which Taoist disciple wouldn't rush to Jade Mountain after receiving the news? Wu Tian sighed, even if they know it's Confucian cultivators, the scheme of Confucian cultivators. Xiao Hua sneered. At this moment, he truly understood what Li Xiang said that day. For these things, it's already not bad if half of these thousands of cultivators can come out. Master, don't blame them for not seeing through it. Even if it's disciple, if it wasn't for Master's guidance and knowing that my future is bright, even if disciple understood the trap inside, disciple would still have to brace himself and charge inside. Damn, there are at least 1,000 nascent soul cultivators. The more they flew forward, the more astonished Xiao Hua felt. Dawn Rain Continent only has a few nascent soul cultivators. Why are there so many in Hidden Immortal Continent? Chapter 3596. Rumble. At this moment, A series of drumming sounds rang out, even more deafening than thunder. After 9 drumming sounds, the red clouds began to roll, and rays of golden light pierced through the clouds. Then, the red clouds began to gather in all directions. In just a moment, they had condensed into 28 huge clouds. On the clouds stood 28 immortal generals in shining armor. These immortal generals had different appearances. Some were thick, some were short, and some were thin. Even their mounts were different. Some were tigers, some were wolves, and there were even some strange rabbits and roosters. 28 lunar mansions? Xiao Hua stopped in the air and glanced around. He could not help but think to himself. Behind these 28 immortal generals, there were dozens of immortal soldiers in bright armor. Although the immortal soldiers behind each immortal general held the same weapon, the weapons of the 28 immortal generals were different. At this moment, these immortal soldiers and immortal generals all had solemn expressions. The clouds under their feet rolled, and there was another loud drumming sound. Beside each immortal general, there was a huge man who was several feet tall, holding a huge drumstick. He appeared from the clouds along with the huge heavenly drum. The huge men were naked from the waist up. Layers of faint mist lingered around them. Under the mist, there was a layer of oily luster on their skin. The luster danced with their muscles, flashing with a strange brilliance. Ding ding dong dong. Among the earth-shaking drumming, there was another burst of music. Although this sound was not as deafening as the drumming, it was still loud. When Xiao Hua and the others raised their heads, in the clouds behind the 28 immortal generals, there were women in palace dresses, either holding a flute or a pipa. There were even groups of glittering chimes in the clouds. After half a meal's worth of time, the drumming gradually subsided, and the music slowly lingered in their ears. A pillar of light more brilliant than the sun emerged from the top of Yaotai Mountain, shining directly at the center of the 28 immortal generals. An old man in Confucian attire, wearing a tall crown, and holding a jade tablet in his hand slowly descended from the pillar of light. Wasn't this the Lord of Star Lord Palace, Kong Hongwu? This was the first time Xiao Hua had seen Kong Hongwu. His gaze unconsciously fell on the pillar of light. His eyes narrowed as he carefully sized up this old man with an ancient face. When Kong Hongwu's figure landed on the 28 immortal generals and stopped about 10 feet away, Kong Hongwu looked around and looked at the Taoist cultivators on his left. He raised the jade tablet with both hands, bowed to the rising sun in the east, and said, "My name is Kong Hongwu, a disciple of the Confucian cultivators. I am entrusted by the Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent to take charge of the Star Lord Palace. Today is the day when the Star Lord Palace opens the Yaotai meeting. I, the 1,000-star generals, sincerely ask the ancestors of the Confucian cultivators to allow me to open the Yaotai Mountain and hold the Yaotai meeting." Before Kong Hongwu's voice fell, streams of awe-inspiring aura fell from the Yaotai Mountain. That awe-inspiring aura became extremely dazzling with 9 colors. Along with this rainbow-like pillar of light, a glittering imperial edict fell from the sky. Kong Hongwu very exaggeratedly bowed down and received that imperial edict. Then he opened that imperial edict. Rumble! The sound of a tide came from the imperial edict. A huge dragon's roar came from the tide. Soon after, a 10,000 zhang yellow light rushed into the air. That yellow light unexpectedly looked like a dragon leaping into the 9 heavens. It fluttered in that 9-colored light for a few moments, then coiled up and laid down on the Yaotai Mountain. A kind of indescribable dragon's might and monarch's authority was even heavier than the Yaotai Mountain's pressure on the hearts of all the Taoist cultivators. At this time, a voice like a big yellow bell reverberated between heaven and earth. By the will of the heavens, the ancestors of the hidden immortal continent congratulate each other. Today, at the Yaotai meeting, the stars will. Every word of the imperial edict fell into Xiao Hua's ears and penetrated the bottom of his heart. Every word was like a huge rock that struck Xiao Hua's Tao foundation and destroyed his confidence in himself. Confucian cultivators. No, it should be said that the methods of the Immortal Palace are really amazing. Xiao Hua slightly narrowed his eyes, allowing this Confucian cultivator's sound attack to baptize his Dao heart. At this time, Xiao Hua's Dao heart was incomparably firm, and his Dao foundation was also extremely stable. It was like a towering dragon rock that towered into the sky. No matter how this sound attacked, it could not be damaged in the slightest. Even in this sound, his Dao foundation became even more solid. Looking at those early Jindan cultivators, many of their eyes began to collapse, and a kind of worship expression gradually emerged. Of course, without waiting for the voice to finish reading the imperial edict, many cultivators flashed with golden light and began to resist this sound attack. They did not see any particularly embarrassing scene, but this moment of shaking of the Dao foundation had already caused some impact. After the imperial edict was read by the heavens, the sound of, "by the will of the heavens," fell. Kong Hongwu led a group of immortal soldiers and immortal generals to bow and salute. He loudly said, "By the will of the heavens, thank the heavens for their grace." Among the thousands of cultivators, there were also some people who could not help but follow in a low voice. The fear of the will of the heavens had already quietly been planted in their hearts. Boom! After the imperial edict was read, a loud sound of waves crashing against the rocks was heard. The entire imperial edict slowly closed, but that huge yellow dragon didn't disappear. When the imperial edict fell into Kong Hongwu's hands, Kong Hongwu gently sent it into the sky. Shua! The imperial edict was like a meteor that soared into the sky and hit the sky. The entire sky shook violently. A huge black hole flashed and a golden frame was revealed. The imperial edict fell into the black hole and disappeared. A dazzling brilliance that was more dazzling than the sun rushed out from the black hole. Everyone involuntarily closed their eyes. Roar! Without waiting for everyone to open their eyes, the coiling dragon looked up to the sky and roared. Its huge body began to swim toward the hole. In just a moment, the dragon disappeared into the hole, and the hole transformed into a dragon gate that was dozens of feet long. Whoosh whoosh! On the side of the dragon gate, the 9-colored pillar rapidly flashed and turned into thousands of 9-colored carps. These carps seemed to be going against the current as they rushed toward the dragon gate. Waves of heavenly music resounded, and all the carps that rushed through the dragon gate turned into dragons and roared into the 9 heavens. Fellow immortals! Amidst the heavenly music, Kong Hongwu straightened his body. His body expanded under the multicolored light, and Kong Hongwu said in a dignified manner, "Today, the dragon gate of the Jade Mountain will be opened, and it is the time for you fellow immortals to show off your skills. In order to welcome you fellow immortals, my Star Monarch Hall has specially asked the heavens to order us to prepare 3 unique treasures for you fellow immortals." As he spoke, Kong Hongwu took out a jade box from his wide sleeve. He looked around and said in a deep voice, "This is the ghost gall of the cold ghost gall. Legend has it that it is the ghost gall of the cold ghost gall of the tens of thousands of ghosts in the cold ghost gall of the cold ghost gall. Ordinary people would be injured by the ghostly chi within if they hastily looked at it. This item can be used by a great tool master to refine a cold imperial tool, and it can also be used to refine Dao sect pills. Of course, the most important use is to help fellow immortals with special secret techniques break through their bottlenecks. If used properly, it can allow fellow immortals in the late stage of nascent soul to break through to the out-of-body stage." See. Just as Kong Hongwu finished speaking, many people sucked in a breath of cold air. Their eyes were filled with admiration. Kong Hongwu's expression didn't change. He raised his hand, and the jade box flew into the sky. Just at that moment, a 9-colored carp transformed into a dragon flew past. With a roar, it opened its mouth and swallowed the jade box into its stomach. Immediately after, it charged into the multicolored dragon gate and disappeared. Immediately after, Kong Hongwu leisurely took out another jade box from his other sleeve. He raised his hand and said, "This is the ancestor of pure yang. Legend has it that all of the flames in the world were born from this item. It was harvested from the true sun star by our ancient Confucian divine ancestor. It has always been used to condense the most holy and most yang weapons. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to keep it, Only cultivators with special secret techniques would be able to use it. It is different from the cold ghost gall. This item may not be able to help fellow immortals break through their bottlenecks, but if used to refine fellow immortals' magic treasures, it should be able to reach the spirit treasure realm. Weng. Kong Hongwu's words immediately ignited everyone's curiosity. Many people exclaimed in low voices. There was an ancient saying in the hidden immortal continent: magic treasures are easy to obtain, spirit tools are hard to find, immortal tools are impossible to find. On the hidden immortal continent, where the Dao sects flourished, magic weapons were commonly used by the Dao sects, and spiritual weapons with spirituality were extremely rare. As for immortal weapons that cultivators couldn't control, it was even more impossible to find traces of them. The reason why spirit tools were so rare was not only because there were very few cultivators who could refine spirit tools, but also because the materials that could refine spirit tools were even rarer. Now, this so-called ancestor of pure yang was actually able to refine spirit treasures that were a level higher than spirit tools. Which cultivator could remain calm? Even if they couldn't refine spirit tools, their innate greed had already grown out of their eyes. A pair of hands grabbed onto the jade box in Kong Hongwu's hand. Among the crowd of cultivators, Xiao Hua's eyes flashed with astonishment. He didn't know what the cold ghost gall was, and he didn't have this name in his memory. Moreover, this extremely cold item didn't have any special effect on Xiao Hua's cultivation, so he wasn't very tempted. But when he heard this ancestor of pure yang, Xiao Hua immediately thought of the innate true fire, and even the innate fire essence. However, when Kong Hongwu later said that this ancestor of pure yang was taken from the sun true star, Xiao Hua slightly shook his head. How could the innate fire essence be taken from the sun true star? Even Xiao Hua didn't think that this jade box could contain the innate fire essence. Looking at the greed in the eyes of the crowd of cultivators, Kong Hongwu faintly smiled. With a shake of his hand, the jade box soared into the sky and was swallowed by a flying dragon. A layer of strange flames suddenly appeared on the flying dragon's body, and it directly rushed into the dragon gate and disappeared. Almost all of the cultivators' eyes followed the flying dragon as it landed on the dragon gate. No one saw where Kong Hongwu took out the third jade box from. After the third jade box was taken out, Kong Hongwu didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly looked at the jade box for a moment. The entire Yaodai mountain only had faint immortal music. All of the cultivators reluctantly shifted their gaze from the dragon gate. Many cultivators couldn't help but swallow their saliva and pricked up their ears, waiting for Kong Hongwu to speak. Chapter 3597. This item seizes the fortune of the heavens, condenses the essence of heaven and earth, and gathers the blood of true dragons. It's called Green Abyss Dragon Saliva. Kong Hongwu said word by word, his tone full of admiration and regret. Perhaps there is a medicine of immortality in this world, perhaps it exists in the hands of the Immortal Palace's empress, but the medicine of immortality is hard to come by, and the fate of immortality cannot be expected. This Green Abyss Dragon Saliva can increase one's lifespan by 2,000 years. What's the difference between it and a mortal medicine of immortality? Alas, it's a pity that I'm not a Taoist, so I can't participate in the Jade Pavilion gathering. This item is reserved for a Taoist. While speaking, Kong Hongwu carefully waved his hand and the jade box was about to soar into the sky. At this moment, a voice familiar to Xiao Hua sounded from afar. Hall Master Kong, wait, Hua de Jinren? Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and looked at the figure that flew out. Oh, so it's Taoist Hua de. Kong Hongwu's expression didn't change. He nodded slightly and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" "I have something to ask Hall Master." Hua de Jinren's gaze was very clear. He smiled and said, "Please speak. My Star Lord Hall doesn't have anything that can't be said to others. Taoist can ask." Kong Hongwu seemed to understand something and said with a smile, "I was invited by Hall Master to come and watch the ceremony. Star Lord Hall's ceremony is spectacular and extremely respectful to our Taoist cultivators. I can represent the Taoist cultivators of the hidden immortal continent to thank Star Lord Hall for their hard work. Huijinren said and bowed on behalf of the cultivators. Kong Hongwu faintly smiled and raised his hand. This is my duty. It's nothing. Xiaohua sneered. He knew that Kong Hongwu had arranged this long ago. Huijinren bowed to Kong Hongwu on behalf of the Taoist sections. Kong Hongwu actually just raised his hand and bowed back. The prestige of Confucian cultivators could be seen. Then Huijinren said, "But I feel that Hall Master Kong sealed the 3 treasures in the jade box and didn't let us see it. I feel that it's inappropriate. As the saying goes, seeing is believing. Who can guarantee that there's nothing in the jade box? The palace master is magnanimous, but he can't stop others from having other thoughts." What spiritual master said is very reasonable. This old man's thinking is lacking. Kong Hongwu nodded slightly, but when his gaze fell on the jade box, he said awkwardly, "It's just that this azure dragon saliva was sealed in this jade box by my Confucian sage with inscriptions. Only the magic of Taoist cultivators can open it. Once this jade box is opened, the item inside will be taken by the cultivator who opens it. This old man can't let Taoist and fellow immortals take a look." "Well," Huijinren looked troubled. He waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, I'll trust you. After all, Star Lord Hall." However, at this moment, Taoist Ching Su's voice rang out again. "Old man Huida, you may believe in the Star Lord Hall, but we may not. How can you represent the Taoism of the world? What you said earlier was right. Seeing is believing. How can we be sure if we don't see for ourselves?" That's right, that's right." In an instant, voices of doubt rose and fell everywhere. Huijinren was furious. He pointed at Taoist Ching Su in the distance and said, "Old man Ching Su, you may not believe in my thousands of years of reputation, but how can you not believe in Star Lord Hall's 100,000 or even 1,000,000 years of reputation? When has there ever been a mistake in the Jadestage meeting, which is held every 10 years? It hasn't happened before, but it doesn't mean it won't happen this time. It doesn't mean it won't happen in the future." Taoist Ching Su sneered. "And how can I know if there have been any mistakes in the past? I'm afraid only Star Lord Hall knows. Or second brother Huida, you know that, right?" You're being unreasonable." Huijinren was so angry that his face turned red. He looked up at Kong Hongwu and the 28 immortal generals and said, "This old man has never heard of a situation where the rare treasure invited by the Jadestage meeting was not honored." You two don't have to argue," Kong Hongwu said confidently with a smile. "Huijinren is this old man's good friend. This old man doesn't know this fellow Taoist. However, both of you are fighting for the Taoism cultivators and are the backbone of the Taoism cultivators. This old man is very comforted. Although this old man can't open this jade box without permission, this old man can swear a Confucian oath to prove that this jade box, and the previous 2 jade boxes, has the thing this old man is talking about." Huijinren was stunned. Obviously, Kong Hongwu's words were beyond his imagination. Ching Su Taoist was helpless. He thought for a bit and lowered his head. After all, a Confucian oath was similar to a Taoist oath. Once the oath was made, it would take effect immediately. "I, Kong Hongwu, as the Lord of Star Lord Hall, as a Confucian Grandmaster, swear to the Star Saint of our Confucian ancestors." As Kong Hongwu recited the oath, thunder rumbled in the void. It was as if dozens of dragons fell on top of Kong Hongwu's head. At the same time, a crimson rainbow bridge fell from the sky and covered Kong Hongwu. "Today, I hold 3 jade boxes in my hand. The 3 items on Jadestage Mountain match what I said. If there is even the slightest difference, I will be smashed to pieces and my soul will be destroyed. My cultivation will not be able to advance, and I will never be able to step into the realm of literary saint for the rest of my life." Kacha! With a loud sound, dozens of thunderbolts fell on top of Kong Hongwu's head. The top of the crimson rainbow bridge condensed an extremely tiny crystal. This crystal was crimson in color and carried traces of bloody light. Once this crystal was formed, The crimson rainbow bridge immediately rolled back and disappeared into the horizon with this crystal. This is the oath of a Confucian cultivator? Xiaohua was dumbstruck as he watched from the side. Damn it, isn't this kind of momentum too great? Compared to this, our Taoist oath is almost like whispers. Fellow immortal Huada, fellow immortal, what do you think? Kong Hongwu's tone was still indifferent. He asked softly, but there was an indescribable majesty in his voice. Hua Junren seemed to have woken up. He hurriedly cupped his hands and said, Hall Master Kong is righteous and magnanimous. I admire you. Qing Su Daoist's face was also a bit pale. His eyes seemed to have a kind of greed. He stared at the jade boxes and didn't say anything else. In that case, please. Kong Hongwu raised his hand. The jade boxes once again soared into the sky and fell into the dragon gate, disappearing. Everyone, except Xiaohua, looked at the flying dragon with a burning gaze. They were reluctant to part with it. Cough cough, fellow immortals. Kong Hongwu cleared his throat and said, This old man has already sent the 3 treasures to the Yaota Mountain. As for where they landed, this old man doesn't know. Either way, treasures have spirits. Those who are fated will get them. These 3 fated people must be among you fellow immortals. Of course, apart from these 3 treasures, the entire Yaotai Mountain will be open to all fellow immortals who are participating in the Yaotai gathering. Fellow immortals can get their own spiritual grasses and spiritual items. My Star Lord Hull won't interfere. The entire Yaotai Mountain? Xiaohua was shocked. He heard from Li Xiang that every Yaotai gathering was a part of the Yaotai Mountain. He didn't seem to have heard that it was completely used. What's going on? Not to mention Xiaohua, almost everyone was shocked. After all, this place was big, so the chances of finding treasures were reduced. Many thanks for Hall Master Kong's help. Taoist Huada smiled and said, This way, we Taoist cultivators can pick more spiritual fruits and find more spiritual items. No need to be so polite. Kong Hongwu waved his hand. This is only a kind of compensation. Because this Yaotai gathering has a very small number of imperial tutors' lots, this old man felt apologetic in his heart, so he specially sealed and opened a lot of spiritual lands for fellow immortals to pick. Oh? How many are there? Taoist Huada asked in surprise. Obviously, this was also out of his expectations. Kong Hongwu waved his big sleeve. Shua! Like a peacock spreading its tail, 10 rays of colorful light rushed out. 10 fist-sized objects that were somewhat similar to the imperial tutor's seal fell in the air. This object looked like a leopard or a tiger. Its body was covered with layers of dragon scales. Layers of yellow mist emerged from the dragon scales, wrapping the entire imperial tutor's seal. Baitan! Xiaohua saw clearly through the light. It was actually an imperial tutor's seal. Hall Master Kong, are you kidding me? There are only 10 imperial tutors' lots? Taoist Huada almost blurted out. How is this enough? Sorry. Fellow immortal Huad. Kong Hongwu's face was full of apology. This old man knows that there are too few imperial tutors' lots, so I opened the whole Yaotai Mountain. Moreover, this time the 3 rare treasures are really shocking. It's also a kind of compensation for fellow immortals of Taoist. Alas, fine. Taoist Huada shook his head slightly and didn't speak again. His eyes were looking at the dragon gate, but no one knew what he was thinking. Hall Master Kong, this year's imperial tutors' lots are too few. Taoist Qing Su said loudly, Why don't you add more? Otherwise, this old man and others won't participate. Kong Hongwu shook his head slightly. If you can add more, why do you need to ask? This is also the reason why I invited Taoist Huada to come here. If you don't want to participate, this old man won't force you. While speaking, Kong Hongwu waved his hand. Roar! Unexpectedly, 10 dragon roars came out from an imperial tutor's seal. And outside the imperial tutor's seal seemed to come alive. It roared and rushed into the dragon gate with yellow clouds and disappeared. Thank you, heavens, for your kindness. The ceremony is complete. Kong Hongwu murmured, and the sound of bamboo and string instruments rose again. The 28 immortal drums sounded like thunder again, and all the clouds began to roll violently again. They gradually shrank into the sky and connected with each other. Behind the 28 clouds, the immortal generals and immortal soldiers were also hidden in the clouds. Even the Dragon Gate, which was shrouded in 9 colors, had disappeared. Only the Dragon Gate, which was overflowing with light, stood majestically in the air, waiting for the dragonized carps to come back, or for the daring cultivators to charge in. Chapter 3598. Fellow Immortals, the Dragon Gate to enter the Yaotai meeting is here. You can only enter but not leave. After 6 hours, the whole Yaotai mountain will still be sealed. The Dragon Gate can only be opened if you find 3 rare treasures and 10 Imperial Preceptor's lots. Of course, if you don't have such good luck and can't find all of them, the Dragon Gate will still be opened after a year. Kong Hongwu's figure didn't change. He said loudly, "Fellow immortals who want to get the rare treasures and the Imperial Preceptor's lots can enter the Dragon Gate now. Only 10 Imperial Preceptor's lots. I don't want to die." Immortal Qing Su looked at the Dragon Gate. Although his eyes were full of desire and eagerness, he finally gritted his teeth and shouted. He turned around and flew out of the Yaotai mountain. "Yes, although we are envious, we don't have such good luck. It's better to go back as soon as possible." Immediately after, another dozen or so golden core cultivators flew out from various places, mumbling as they followed spiritual master Qing Su and flew away. Kong Hongwu's expression didn't change. He just glanced at immortal Qing Su and the others and withdrew his gaze. Although such troublemakers didn't appear every time, he had seen many of them. In front of so many Taoist practitioners, he wouldn't show any difference. "The Imperial Preceptor's lots are useless to me. I won't compete with the younger generation." At this time, Immortal Huoda, who had been silent, said, "But I'm very interested in the Green Abyss Dragon Saliva. I want to enter the Dragon Gate to try my luck. I wonder if Hall Master Kong will agree?" Kong Hongwu was stunned, but he didn't show any reaction on his face. He just replied indifferently, "Fellow Immortal Huoda, although I invited you to attend the meeting, any Taoist practitioner can participate in the Yaotai meeting. There's no limit to the number of times. Since you think the Green Abyss Dragon Saliva is useful to you, you can enter. You don't have to ask for my permission." Immortal Huoda was now at the late nascent soul stage. Although he hadn't reached the peak, his cultivation had already reached the bottleneck. He couldn't break through it either by himself or by using some secret skills of Confucian practitioners. Seeing that his life was not far away, these 2,000 years was an irresistible temptation for him. In fact, if Immortal Qing Su didn't know that he might face Kong Hongwu's attack as soon as he entered the Dragon Gate, he would certainly rush into the Dragon Gate to participate in the Yaotai meeting without hesitation. Immortal Huoda slightly clenched his teeth, then he turned into a rainbow and disappeared into the Dragon Gate in an instant. Immortal Huoda was Immortal Huoda? Immortal Huoda to Qing Su's Immortal Huoda. As soon as Taoist Huoda made his move, the other late nascent soul stage cultivators who coveted the Azure Nether Dragon Saliva were also unable to hold themselves back. Calm, Immortal Qing. Immortal Qing and Immortal Cultivators. Immortal Mountain. Kong Hongwu looked at them with an imperceptible smile on his face. His body slowly produced clouds and disappeared into the depths of the clouds in a moment. "Master!" Chang Yu and Wu Tian, who were standing beside Xiaohua, swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said in a low voice, "Damn it, a lifespan of 2,000 years, if it weren't for Master, we would have entered the Jade Pavilion gathering to try our luck. If you want to go, go. This is a kind of blessing. Maybe you can get it." Xiaohua smiled faintly. Chang Yu's heart moved. He couldn't help but look at the Dragon Gate. He was a cultivator at the late Gold Core stage. Among thousands of cultivators, he was considered to be in the upper class. "Senior Xiao." At this time, a respectful voice sounded. Xiaohua turned his head and saw Zhu Qingli, who had left without saying goodbye earlier. Zhu Qingli respectfully bowed and said, "Junior met an old friend the day before yesterday and exchanged cultivation experiences with him. Junior has just come out of seclusion. Is Senior going to attend the Yaotai meeting today? If possible, Senior, please take care of me. Xiaohua smiled. He just glanced at Zhu Qingli and didn't say anything. His heart was benevolent, but he wasn't an idiot. How could he take Zhu Qingli's words seriously? Moreover, there was also Chang Yu and Wu Tian's description. As a nascent soul cultivator, he naturally wouldn't attack Zhu Qingli. But how could he take care of Zhu Qingli? Zhu Qingli seemed to have anticipated the current awkwardness, so he remained calm. He smiled at Xiaohua and said to Wu Tian, "Fellow Taoist Wu, since you're already here, why don't you come with me and Senior Chang to the Jade Pavilion conference?" Wu Tian's face was calm. He said faintly, "I'm already serving Master Xiao. With his guidance, I don't need any treasures." Zhu Qingli was stunned. He obviously didn't expect Xiaohua to accept Wu Tian as his disciple. In addition to being surprised, his eyes couldn't help but have a kind of strong jealousy. Wu Tian's words were like a heavy hammer, waking Chang Yu up. Chang Yu also smiled and said, "That's right. I'm also serving Master Xiao now. I don't need the state teacher's fortune anymore. As for the 2,000 years of life, I'm confident I can get it with Master Xiao's guidance. I also don't need to participate in this so-called Yaotai meeting." Zhu Qingli hid the regret in his heart. He took a deep breath and cupped his hands. "Congratulations, fellow Taoists. I don't have much fortune, so I have to think of a way myself. I hope I'll be lucky enough to see the moment you two become masters." After saying that, he bowed to Xiaohua again. "Junior also wishes Senior to get what you want." Then, without waiting for Xiaohua to say anything, he flew into the Dragon Gate and disappeared. "Master?" Chang Yu transmitted his voice. Disciple remembers that Zhu Qingli also went to Master's quiet room alone that day. Did Master not agree to his request? Xiaohua smiled and transmitted his voice. "Other people's opportunities are other people's. You don't need to ask. Even if other people are heartless, they're other people's. You don't need to know." Disciple understands. Chang Yu knew Xiaohua was a gentleman. Although he wasn't satisfied with Zhu Qingli's actions, he wouldn't talk about Zhu Qingli's misdeeds in front of others. "You can make your own arrangements." Xiaohua waved his hand. "When I come back from Yaotai Mountain, I'll look for you. As for this green abyss dragon saliva, you really don't need it." "Yes, disciple understands." Chang Yu and Wu Tian bowed and said, "Congratulations. Taoist Xiao to successfully obtain the lot for the state teacher." After saying that, the two turned around and flew away. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to enter Yaotai Mountain. Instead, he pinched his chin and looked around carefully. Now, in the sky above Yaotai Mountain, other than that dragon gate, everything else was covered by red clouds. It was exactly the same as before. He couldn't see the true situation of Yaotai Mountain. At this moment, figures rushed in one after another at the dragon gate and disappeared one by one. Originally, there were several thousand cultivators, but now more than 30% had entered. Apart from Xiaohua and the other cultivators who were still watching, about 20% of the cultivators were very decisive. They flew away one after another, not daring to delay here. 10 lots for the state teacher? Xiaohua thought to himself. Pitifully few. However, if this Xiao acts, it won't be a problem to get one of them. In reality, even if I can't get the lot for the state teacher, it won't be a problem. If Xiao Jian and Changling want to revive Jiang country, they won't succeed in 10 or 20 years. This Xiao just needs to get it before they establish their country. Also, even if this Xiao doesn't have the lot for the state teacher, can't Jiang country sell dog meat and let old man Bagua of the Copper Pillar country take the position of state teacher? As to the green abyss dragon saliva, there are too many people fighting for it. This Xiao covets the 2,000-year lifespan, but if I really want to take it, I will have to be ruthless. This Xiao just entered Yuanying and has 2,000 years of lifespan. This Xiao has the 5-element righteous thunder to cultivate Yuanying. I fear that I won't need 1,000 years to enter late Yuanying. There should be enough time. Just as Xiaohua was thinking, another familiar voice sounded from the distance. Fellow Taoist Xiao, can we travel together? Xiaohua looked up. It was Hong Songzi flying over with a smile. Of course. Xiaohua smiled and moved his body to fly over. He raised his hands and answered. Unexpectedly, Hai Hongzi behind Hong Songzi frowned slightly and said with displeasure, "Fellow Taoist Hong Songzi, we have been discussing how the three of us can work together these days. Also, the talisman I forged can only be used by the three of us. Adding on Taoist Xiao, how can we use it? Also, Taoist Zhao's strength is outstanding. If he joins us, we fear that the distribution we made before is not appropriate." Taoist Yuan Qing, who was flying beside Hai Hongzi, also glanced at Hai Hongzi with displeasure. He didn't expect that Hai Hongzi didn't send a sound transmission but directly said these words in front of Xiaohua. Even if Xiaohua had self-restraint, he probably wouldn't be able to cooperate with them. Sure enough, Xiaohua smiled faintly, stopped in midair, and said, "Fellow Taoist Hong Songzi, since you have already discussed, this Xiao will not rashly join this." Hong Songzi was very embarrassed and angry. He turned his head to look at Hai Hongzi. Unfortunately, Hai Hongzi only smiled apologetically at Xiaohua and ignored Hong Songzi. "This Xiao will go first." Xiaohua raised his hand and gestured slightly. His figure rushed through the sky and landed inside the Dragon Gate. With a flash of multicolored light, his figure disappeared. Hong Songzi retracted his gaze from the Dragon Gate and said coldly, "Hai Hongzi, what is the meaning of this? Didn't this old man already tell you before? Although I haven't discussed with Taoist Xiao these days, inviting him to join us is not too much, right?" Hai Hongzi was not afraid. He only smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Hong Songzi, the Taoist Xiao you mentioned before is a fellow Taoist with similar cultivation to us. Not this Taoist Xiao who is stronger than Taoist Huada. With such a strong fellow Taoist beside us, do you think we can get the Azure Nether Dragon saliva? Even if we get it, how much can we get? Also, fellow Taoist, don't forget that Taoist Huada is also participating in the Jade Pavilion meeting. His purpose is obviously the Azure Nether Dragon saliva. He and Xiaohua can be said to be irreconcilable. Do you and I need to get involved?" Chapter 3599. It shouldn't be as serious as you think, right? Taoist Yuan Qing shook his head slightly and looked at the place where Xiaohua disappeared. "Maybe it's not that serious, but we have to think so." Hai Hongzi didn't give up his position and explained, "If we don't get involved, even if we can't get the Green Abyss Dragon saliva, we can still come back alive from the Jade Pavilion conference. But if we get involved, it'll be a dead end." Hong Songzi looked at Taoist Yuan Qing. Both of their eyes flashed with helplessness. Hai Hongzi was right. Xiaohua was certainly a great help, but at the same time, he was also a great enemy. The disadvantages of cooperating with Xiaohua outweighed the advantages. "Let's go." Taoist Yuan Qing waved his hand and said, "According to our previous discussion, after entering the Jade Mountain, we'll immediately activate the magic treasure refined by Taoist Hai Hongzi. We'll find each other and then join hands to search for the treasure." Hong Songzi and Hai Hongzi nodded and the three of them flew into the Dragon Gate. What they didn't know was that behind the layers of red clouds, Kong Hanwu was also looking at the disappearing Xiaohua with confusion and thought, "This Xiaohua, how can he be so daring? Even Taoist Qing Su didn't dare to enter, but he dared to come? Could it be that there are secrets among these thousands of cultivators that I don't know? Humph, since you're here, I'll let you know how powerful I am. If I can get the trace of the Grand Mist Ancestor from you, it'll be a great contribution." Kong Hongwu's figure also disappeared. At the foot of the Jade Mountain, the number of cultivators gathered became fewer and fewer. The 20% of cultivators who could resist the temptation had already left. The remaining cultivators were just hesitating and waiting. Eventually, more and more cultivators couldn't resist the temptation and rushed into the Dragon Gate. Only a few hundred gold core cultivators and a dozen early nascent soul cultivators remained. However, when another thunderclap came from the red clouds, the huge Dragon Gate began to shake and gradually shrink. The last group of cultivators couldn't resist anymore. They all rushed into the Dragon Gate and waited until the last gold core cultivator disappeared. Gotcha! Like glass breaking, the Dragon Gate cracked out of thin air. The dragon gate, which had shrunk to a few feet, was broken into dozens of pieces and then melted into golden liquid that fell into the void. When Xiaohua flew into the dragon gate, a powerful suction force was generated from all around the dragon gate. In an instant, a passage formed by 9 colored clouds appeared in front of his eyes. The surface of the passage was a layer of clouds that kept spiraling inward in a spiral shape. In the depths of the clouds, there were still some faint inscriptions flashing. The noble spirit roared and boiled out from the gaps of the clouds. The inscriptions were born in the flickering inscriptions, carrying Xiaohua's figure and constantly rushing into the depths. Ha! Xiaohua felt the pressure on his body and the abnormality of the passage in the clouds. He couldn't help but be a little surprised. The pressure on my body seems to be the heavy pressure of the transmission formation. Moreover, the rotation of the passage in the clouds is somewhat similar to the Soul Cultivator's transmission formation. Could it be that this dragon gate is a transmission formation for Confucian cultivators? Or could it be that the Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent don't have transmission formations, but these transmission formations are not known to ordinary Confucian cultivators? While thinking to himself, Xiaohua tried to release his soul sense. Sure enough, the clouds flashed with an intense tearing force. Xiaohua's soul sense was torn to shreds within a few breaths of time. Xiaohua didn't dare to increase his soul sense for fear that he would destroy this transportation channel. He didn't know where he would end up. This transmission formation seemed to be very far away. Xiaohua stayed in this passage for the time it took to eat a meal. During this time, there was no one in front of the passage. There were also no other cultivators chasing behind the passage. Presumably, every Taoist cultivator who entered the Dragon Gate would have such a legendary passage. Woo! Suddenly, in the passage not far in front of Xiaohua, there was a whimper of wind. A dot of orange light suddenly appeared. Then, the passage in the clouds in front of Xiaohua shrank towards this dot of light as if it was being pulled. Xiaohua's figure also rushed towards this dot of light. Perhaps Xiaohua was shrinking, or perhaps the dot of light was expanding. When Xiaohua flew in front of the dot of light, that dot of light had already turned into a several zhang large light curtain. Xiaohua's whole body flashed with golden light. When he swept with his soul sense, he was immediately bounced back by the light curtain. Although the inscriptions on the light curtain were tumbling, the aura it revealed was so docile that Xiaohua couldn't feel any discomfort. Pa! With a soft and crisp sound, Xiaohua crashed into the light curtain. The scene in front of his eyes overflowed, as if he had passed through several small worlds. When Xiaohua's figure landed, he looked around and unconsciously frowned again. At this time, Xiaohua was standing in a low valley. He was surrounded by several zhang cliffs. High up in the sky, several qi large clouds condensed into a vortex. The vortex gradually shrank, and one by one, the inscriptions disappeared alternately. There weren't any special spirit fruits or spirit herbs on the nearby cliffs. There were only a number of dark green things that crookedly covered the entire cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a deep pool. There were many small waterfalls around the deep pool. At the foot of the mountain, there were many small streams flowing from the cracks in the cliff and converging into the deep pool. The deep pool was dark green, and a chill mixed with rich world's yuan qi rushed into Xiaohua's mouth and nose. At the edge of the deep pool, there were layers of needle-like leaves covering the ground. If he wasn't mistaken, they should be dark green things that fell down. Xiaohua looked around and was a little surprised. He tried to release his soul sense. After exploring for a while, Xiaohua finally had some understanding of the surroundings. The entire valley was sealed by a layer of restriction. This restriction was broken, and Xiaohua's soul sense couldn't be considered complete. Moreover, where the restriction was intact, Xiaohua's soul sense was suppressed and difficult to penetrate. However, where the restriction was broken, Xiaohua's soul sense could vaguely penetrate and he could see the spirit herbs growing high up in the cliff. This is a restriction. Xiaohua already understood and thought to himself, it's no wonder that even though the heaven-earth origin qi here is so dense, there aren't any spirit herbs growing here. Only I, Xiaohua, will be able to break through this restriction and escape to pick spirit fruits and search for treasures. But How can I break this restriction? Xiaohua slowly flew towards the stone cliff, slowly searching. This is the Jasper Pavilion Gathering, a formation personally set up by the Star Lord Hall. It should be able to trap a late nascent soul stage cultivator. I can't not be cautious. Near the cliff, Xiaohua's soul sense swept over and he didn't find anything strange. He touched the hard and cold stone wall with his hand, but he still didn't find anything. After Xiaohua finished looking at the 4 stone cliffs, his gaze once again landed on the jade-green deep pool. This pool couldn't be considered big. It was even smaller than the cold pool in Yellow Flower Ridge. However, the cold air was twice as strong as the cold pool in Yellow Flower Ridge. This deep pool can absorb divine sense. Xiaohua's divine sense swept over the pool and he was immediately surprised. His eyes flashed with a trace of greed. After thinking for a moment, he plucked a few withered leaves from his space and casually threw them into the pool. The moment these withered leaves landed on the water surface, they only created ripples and the entire leaf instantly sank into the pool. Weak water? Xiaohua heard of this water that even leaves couldn't bear. He couldn't help but shout, "I'm rich!" Of course, the incomparably fierce innate primordial water in the eyes of others was absorbed into Xiaohua's clear water bottle. What could this insignificant weak water count for? Perhaps in Xiaohua's eyes, it could only be a treasure that could make him open his eyes. However, without waiting for Xiaohua to land in midair, a chilly wind suddenly appeared and very strangely scraped the ground. A few needle-like leaves were lifted up by the chilly wind. Wooh! The needle-like leaves streaked across the air, unexpectedly producing an even more strange whimpering sound. After the whimpering sound passed, a mournful sound rang out. Looking again at the surrounding needle-like leaves of the deep pool, it was as if they were being grabbed by a big hand, flying up into the air in an extremely orderly fashion. The needle-like leaves were gone, exposing the ground beside the pool. At this time, the ground was densely engraved with tiny inscriptions that looked like ants. These inscriptions had begun to squirm like living ants. Wisps of noble aura blew down rapidly with the sound of the wind. When these noble aura passed through the needle-like leaves, many of them were absorbed by the needle-like leaves. In just the blink of an eye, the cold air in the pool surged up even more. The needle-like leaves also swelled up to more than 10 inches. Now, the leaves revealed their original malevolence. They were actually sawtooth-shaped imperial tools. On these imperial tools, there were thin holes that couldn't be seen. In between the holes, there were layers of inscriptions. The mournful whimpering sound came from these holes. The inscriptions were still absorbing the awe-inspiring qi. Countless imperial tools continued to swell up. The entire valley is completely filled with these imperial tools. How much effort is needed to create this? Xiaohua's gaze swept over, and he was slightly surprised. After all, this imperial array was not only particularly fine, but also covered a large area. He didn't know how much effort it took to create it. Sure enough, as the whirlwind in the valley grew stronger, the inscriptions also began to flicker. The wind borrowed the power of the inscriptions, and the inscriptions aided the might of the wind. The countless imperial tools quickly trembled in the whirlwind. Especially as the whirlwind rose up layer by layer, the inscriptions on the originally ordinary cliff also revealed inscriptions. These inscriptions were different from the inscriptions on the side of the pool. As the whirlwind blew, the inscriptions actually began to chant. Thick awe-inspiring qi quickly descended from the sky and rushed into the whirlwind in the valley. Not only that, but what surprised Xiaohua the most was that when the cold air in the pool rushed into the whirlwind, countless imperial tools began to condense white frost. A kind of austere killing intent gradually emerged from the whirlwind and quickly diffused throughout the entire valley. The cold wind cut the face, and the frost pierced the heart. Xiaohua nodded inwardly. The imperial array in the valley had already become like this in just a few breaths. If it was activated, how terrible would it be? Moreover, this imperial array had sealed off the entire valley. If a Dao sect cultivator below the early stage of the Gold Core realm fell into this array, it would be difficult for them to escape. Even if they could forcefully break out of the array, their cultivation would be greatly damaged. Chapter 3600. Of course, this kind of small defensive formation was nothing to Xiaohua right now. Xiaohua didn't need to look at the profundity and power of the defensive formation like he did when he faced the 5 brocade cloud painting, nor did he need to show off his might here. He only smiled and slapped the top of his head. A powerful pressure came out of nowhere, and soon after, a nascent soul hand that could cover the entire valley appeared. Rumble! The nascent soul hand streaked across the sky, colliding with the vast chi pillar and the whirlwind. A huge roar resounded through the entire valley. The soul-wrenching screams were loud at first, but soon after, they stopped abruptly like a chicken or duck being choked by its neck. The countless sharp weapons pierced into the nascent soul's hand in a frenzy, but in the face of the massive hand, they were no more than ants trying to shake a tree. Although the sounds of friction were incessant, they quickly disappeared amid rumbling booms. However, the instant Xiaohua's big hand imprisoned all the inscriptions in the valley. Woo! Another wave of surging sound came from the cold pond. Clusters of golden light appeared in the dark green pond, and the entire pond suddenly gave birth to thousands of whirlpools. These whirlpools were actually able to break through the imprisonment of Xiaohua's nascent soul hand, as if thousands of small snakes were pouncing into Xiaohua's nascent soul hand. This restriction is actually somewhat interesting. Xiaohua sensed that the entire nascent soul hand was sore and numb. First, the imprisoned cold energy wanted to respond to the weak water, and the edges of the nascent soul hand actually had some dark blue color. This weak water is actually poisonous. What was even more unexpected to Xiaohua was that the poison of this weak water was actually very powerful. Just as the dark blue color appeared on the nascent soul hand, the imprisonment at the edges of the nascent soul hand showed signs of loosening. The imprisonment slightly loosened, and the whirlwind rose up again, and the vast chi pillar also loudly fell down again. Good, it's not simple. Previously, this Xiao felt that the early gold core stage might not be able to resist it. If the defensive formation of this pond and the defensive formation of the cliff complement each other, I'm afraid that even the middle gold core stage won't be able to pass through. Xiaohua was inwardly speechless. He had just entered the Yaotai Mountain and had yet to understand anything, yet he had already encountered such a large formation. Perhaps the Yaotai Mountain that was several tens of thousands of li was this powerful? Thinking about the thousands of golden core cultivators, Xiaohua couldn't help but worry for them. Pondering in his heart, Xiaohua did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly waved his hand, and the clear water bottle appeared in his hand. His hand formed a Buddhist seal and hit it. Whoosh! A suction force was generated from the clear water bottle, and it covered the tens of thousands of weak water snakes. Indeed, everything has its nemesis. Under the suction force of the Buddhist artifact, these weak water snakes all surrendered. How could they still care about corroding the hand of a Yuanying? Streams of water flowed into the clear water bottle, and the water in the pool gradually fell. The weak water's corrosion was no longer present, and the entire defensive formation surrounding the mountain valley was unable to withstand Xiaohua's Yuanying's hand. With a light kacha sound, the Yuanying's hand grasped all of the tiny imperial equipment in its hand. Xiaohua's current spiritual sense and mind could not be considered particularly harmonious, but dealing with these tiny imperial equipment was still a piece of cake. Xiaohua's mind followed the spiritual sense in the Yuanying's hand and swept all of the imperial equipment into the space. The ground of the entire valley was as clean as if it had been licked by a dog. It's a pity that these inscriptions were carved into the ground. Even if this Xiao has the ability to scour 3 feet of the ground, I don't know if they will still be useful after I collect them. Xiaohua prepared to withdraw the Yuanying's hand. Looking at the alternating light and dark inscriptions on the ground, he inwardly pondered. However, he quickly had a good idea. The Yuanying's hand fiercely grabbed the ground. With a loud boom, a large piece of the ground was grabbed by Xiaohua. That ground was originally as hard as iron, but under the Yuanying's hand, it became pure soil. The tiny inscriptions on the ground were immediately crushed by Xiaohua's hand, and they transformed into streams of awe-inspiring qi that rushed into the air, disappearing in a moment. Ha, exactly. Refreshed. Seeing this, Xiaohua was very happy. He was multitasking. On one hand, he urged the Yuanying's hand to destroy the inscriptions in the valley one by one. On the other hand, he urged his psyche power to collect the weak water. After half an hour, the entire valley, whether it was the stone walls or the ground, was in a mess. There was not a single inscription to be seen. Looking at the previously serene cold pool, the pool water was clean, revealing the dark blue bottom of the pool. There were also many inscriptions at the bottom of the pool, as if pieces of articles were engraved there. As for the center of the pool, there were some white bones above the inscriptions that had not been completely corroded by the weak water. Alas, there are 3,000 weak water. Just one scoop is enough to kill a cultivator. It shows that its corrosive power is very strong. 10 years ago, the cultivators who fell into the weak water had already lost their bones. Seeing these white bones, Xiaohua sighed. These white bones must be the Jindan cultivators who participated in this year's Yaotai meeting. How long has it been, and there are already cultivators who died in this weak water pool? Destroy it? Xiaohua urged his Yuanying's hand again. In just a moment, the inscriptions at the bottom of the pool were destroyed again. The moment the inscriptions completely disappeared, Xiaohua immediately felt relaxed. Xiaohua was overjoyed and hurriedly released his divine sense. Sure enough, the previous seal on the valley had completely disappeared. His divine sense could spread out for more than 10 miles. The entire Yaotai mountain is still within a huge defensive formation. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Xiaohua understood that this must be the suppression of the Taoist cultivator's divine sense by Star Lord Hall. Withdrawing his Yuanying's hand and looking at the messy valley, Xiaohua urged his figure to fly into the air, ready to leave. However, his figure had just flown a few feet when his heart was moved again. He waved his hand, and Little Silver and Little Gua landed in the air. You two, go and see if there are any good things in this valley. The two little things were very obedient, not rebellious like Little Yellow at all. They each landed in a place. In just a moment, Little Gua came back with his head drooping and somewhat dejected. His little mouth was pursed and his hands were empty. Ah! Xiaohua smiled, patted his head and put it into his space. Little Silver, on the other hand, poked his head out of the messy mud and stones and chirped at Xiaohua. Xiaohua understood. He lowered his figure and waved his big sleeve. A lot of huge stones and mud were lifted up. A fist-sized bead, emitting a bewitching light, was revealed in the bottom of the deep pool. Weak water bead? Xiaohua was delighted. He grabbed at the air with one hand and that bead fell into his hand. Sure enough, waves of water surged inside the bead. His divine sense was immediately swallowed when he immersed it. It was the weak water bead, a Taoist magic treasure. Looking at the weak water bead in his hand and thinking about the many Taoist cultivators who died in this valley, Xiaohua's heart was filled with mixed feelings. If a cultivator was strong, the Taoist sect would be strong. If a cultivator was weak, the Taoist sect would be weak. Confucian cultivators used Taoist magic treasures to kill Taoist cultivators, and Taoist cultivators came to throw away their lives one by one every 10 years. Now, they were going to fight to the death for only 10 imperial preceptor slots. Their miserable fates were nothing more than this. Alas, my strength is limited and my path is boundless. It seems that what Taoist Master Qing Su said is somewhat reasonable. Xiaohua sighed and flew out of the valley. For the first time, he had the idea of joining hands with someone. At this moment, the Yaotai mountain was no different from an ordinary blessed land. The blazing sun had already risen to 3 poles high up in the sky. The sunlight wasn't scorching hot. Instead, it was very warm. Gusts of cool breeze blew over, carrying with it the fragrance of the forest. Xiaohua stood in the air above a hill and looked into the distance. Mountain ranges were stacked on top of each other, and layers of green trees and green grass were pleasing to the eye. Looking behind him, there was a mountain peak that looked like an ink brush that pierced the sky. There were some palaces and spiritual trees on it. Some immortal birds were flying around the mountain peak. It looked extremely blurry. Wasn't this the Yaotai mountain that he saw earlier? Xiaohua looked for a moment and couldn't see anything strange. This Yaotai mountain was still a mountain range that was tens of thousands of li in size. Thousands of cultivators were casually sent into it. Under the situation where divine sense was suppressed, it would not be easy to encounter a cultivator. Xiaohua thought for a moment and released his divine sense. Contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, his divine sense was also suppressed in this Yaotai mountain. However, his divine sense was slightly better and could be released tens of li away. But even so, it was the lot of 10 state teachers. Only ghosts knew where it would land. It was impossible to find it by relying on ordinary divine sense. He could only rely on luck. Li Xiang's jade eyes had some description of the Yaotai mountain. However, that description was also very clear. It was only what he saw when he entered the Yaotai mountain. Just as he said, there was no reference at all. Because the valley they entered was completely different from the deep forest that Li Xiang entered. After rushing out of the deep forest, the mountain range was also different from what Xiaohua saw now. What Xiaohua could do now was to try his luck and see if he could use his divine sense to find the lot of state teachers one step ahead. Since he was trying his luck, Xiaohua closed his eyes and didn't release his divine sense. He flew towards a place. Xiaohua didn't believe it. This Yaotai mountain had thousands of Taoist cultivators. N plus Star Lord Hall's Confucian cultivators who would dare to compete with him in luck. Moreover, didn't Xiaohua release his divine sense for tens of li? Xiaohua with his eyes closed clearly flew straighter than Xiaohua with his eyes open. After flying for no less than half a meal's time, Xiaohua opened his eyes and released his divine sense. He saw that he had stopped above a lush green mountain forest. That mountain forest was sandwiched between two mountain peaks. At a glance, it was over 100 li in size. The ancient trees in the mountain forest towered. From time to time, the sound of gurgling water could be heard. Occasionally, the howls of ferocious beasts could be heard from the mountain forest. Xiaohua's gaze swept through the mountain forest. After looking for a moment, he raised his head again and looked at the sky. Then, he turned his head again to look at the distant Yaotai mountain. His figure slowly descended. He carefully released his divine sense, preparing to investigate bit by bit. However, Xiaohua's divine sense had only explored 100 zhang when a mournful scream came from the mountain forest to his left. That scream was very muffled. Just as it sounded, it was immediately suppressed. It was as if a cultivator was swallowed by a ferocious beast. Hearing this, Xiaohua raised his eyebrows. At the same time that his divine sense swept over, he used the wind escape technique. His entire figure flew over like a gust of wind. Chapter 3601. Boom Boom. Waves of awe-inspiring qi fell from the sky, and layers of strange clouds soared into the sky from a corner of the mountain forest. Another Confucian cultivator's defensive formation entered. Xiaohua flew closer and looked at the picturesque ancient trees within a range of several li. Whether it was the stems, leaves, or trunks, they were all emitting mist, and inscriptions flashing with azure brilliance flowed between the leaves of these ancient trees. He immediately understood that this was a defensive formation composed of thousands upon thousands of ancient trees, and if there was no accident, it should be of the wood attribute. Almost without thinking, Xiaohua clapped his hand, and the Yuanying's hand appeared again. It turned into 100 zhang in size, and grabbed from top to bottom. Kacha. Like a thunderclap, the ancient trees within 100 zhang were all grabbed by the huge hand, and the entire ground shook. Clusters of inscriptions carrying awe-inspiring qi condensed into a 1 zhang long spear that pierced into the huge hand. Unfortunately, before the spear could pierce into the huge hand was already shattered by the restrictive force. Roar! The huge hand overturned the defensive formation, revealing the situation inside. 100 zhang huge beast roared and rushed out from the defensive formation. Under the huge beast, a bloody smell was emitted. The craggy mountain rocks were actually covered with bones. Some of the bones were dried up, and some of the bones were dripping with blood. It was quite glaring. This giant beast was like an ox, with a single horn that was several zhang long standing straight on its forehead. The tip of the horn carried a cold light, and the long fur on the giant beast's body flickered with a green brilliance. A single large hoof stepped on the green clouds, and with an indescribable berserk aura, it pounced towards Xiaohua. Xiaohua slightly wrinkled his brows. He knew that this was a kind of ancient beast. Its entire body was coarse and thick, and it was difficult for ordinary magic weapons to break through it. This ho's mouth and nose could spit out a strange stream of air. This stream of air was the most corrosive magic weapons and magic weapons. Even the protective golden light of a Jindan cultivator would find it difficult to resist. He had only seen this thing in Huang Yi's many ancient memories, and he didn't expect to encounter it in the hidden immortal continent. Just as Xiaohua had expected, the hui rushed into the air and violently charged toward Xiaohua. Even when Xiaohua's nascent soul hand descended, the restrictive power was unable to stop the strange airflow from the hui's horn. Rise, Xiaohua sneered. The invisible nascent soul inside his body rubbed its hands together. In an instant, the nascent soul's hand suddenly expanded to the size of several mu. Moreover, this several mu-sized hand became much more solid. Puff puff. The nascent soul's chi waves were shattered one by one, and it forcefully grabbed the chi. The giant palm swayed and was about to grab the hui from the air. The Tai Chi was enraged. Its eyes were bloodshot as it let out a long roar. Green waves of air rushed out of its nose and mouth, slamming into the nascent soul's hand. The nascent soul's hand rapidly collapsed. At the same time, a dazzling brilliance appeared on the wild beast hui's body. This brilliance was like an arrow that directly pierced into the nascent soul's hand. Moreover, within the brilliance was a wisp of green chi. This green chi caused the giant palm to give birth to a slippery feeling. Attacked from both inside and outside, Xiaohua's giant palm was the same as before. It actually had a feeling of being unable to hold on. Xiaohua was slightly startled. He knew that this was a Confucian cultivator from Star-Lord Hall who had a very good understanding of the Dao sect's nascent soul's hand. Whether it was the defensive formation or the ferocious beast, they all seemed to have the means to resist the restrictive power of the Dao sect. However, after Xiaohua was surprised, he sneered again. It was also a nascent soul's hand. Xiaohua didn't believe that this insignificant giant Tai Chi could escape from his nascent soul's hand. Withdraw, Xiaohua snorted coldly. The magic power in his body surged. The giant palm flashed with a golden brilliance and once again exerted more force, crushing the green chi and the brilliance into pieces. Immediately after, Xiaohua's mind stretched out and tried to absorb the struggling hui into his space. The giant Tai Chi was at least 100 zhang in size. Now, one of its hooves was vigorously kicking, and the tip of its horn was also sharp. Xiaohua's mind followed the nascent soul's hand and wrapped around the hui. A tearing force that the giant Tai Chi couldn't resist was gradually born. Woo! The giant Tai Chi struggled with all its might for a moment. It seemed to be somewhat exhausted, and the hissing sound in its mouth also began to become hoarse. Just when Xiaohua's mind was set and he was preparing to think of a way to subdue the giant Tai Chi, suddenly, the surface of the giant Tai Chi's body flashed with thousands of dense inscriptions. What was even more strange was that the inscriptions near the mouth and nose of the giant Tai Chi were like ants pouring into the body of the giant Tai Chi. A fierce, destructive aura with a sense of despair was born out of thin air and frantically poured into the giant Tai Chi's mouth and nose. Not good. Xiaohua seemed to have realized something. He hurriedly pulled his mind out of the nascent soul's hand. At the same time, he withdrew his magic power and his divine sense. The nascent soul's hand instantly collapsed. Although Xiaohua saw the opportunity quickly, in the end he was still a bit slower. When the giant Tai Chi escaped from the nascent soul's hand, it didn't escape like it usually did. Instead, it desperately struggled in the distance. It was even more miserable than when it was caught by the nascent soul's hand before. Boom! With a loud sound, the 100 zhang large giant Tai Chi exploded with a loud bang. Its flesh and blood mixed with a berserk aura rushed toward Xiaohua. Seeing that this unimaginable explosion didn't scatter in all directions, but instead directly rushed towards him, how could Xiao Hua not know that this giant Tai Chi was another method that Confucian cultivators used to kill Dao cultivators? Although the explosion hadn't hit Xiao Hua's body yet, Xiao Hua's divine sense had already been affected by this strange explosion. His entire Naiwan palace shook, and an indescribable dizziness appeared in Xiao Hua's mind. Xiao Hua didn't care about hiding anything. He used the Devil Realm's concealing technique, and his figure quickly disappeared. However, he saw that the pitch-black brilliance in the air was slightly distorted. The impact of the explosion had already dispersed this distortion. When Xiao Hua's figure appeared again, there was a slight anger on his face. He was originally very careful, but he really didn't expect that Confucian cultivators' methods were everywhere. This giant Tai Chi was not only a vicious beast that could kill gold core cultivators, but also a weapon that could kill nascent soul cultivators. Xiao Hua, who was greedy for small gains, almost fell for a big trick. Moreover, as soon as Xiao Hua's figure appeared, dozens of pillars of orange qi appeared out of thin air and attacked Xiao Hua for no reason. This orange qi actually carried a kind of tyranny, as if Xiao Hua was the enemy of the world. Damn it! Xiao Hua suddenly woke up. This was Yaotai Mountain. If he used the Devil Realm's cultivation technique, wouldn't he be courting death? He hurriedly used the wind escape technique. His figure flashed, and he escaped far away. Only then did the vast qi pillars scatter with a loud bang. In the air, that desolate aura gradually disappeared. The violent force destroyed the several hundred zhang mountain forest in the direction Xiao Hua had been at. The original defensive formation had been completely destroyed. The white bones that Xiao Hua saw just now were only a part of the cultivators who had died in the formation. Looking at the forest of white bones, Xiao Hua's heart was touched again. After releasing Little Silver and Xiaogua, Xiao Hua spat out the true Samadhi fire, which turned into a fire net and burned all the white bones in the range of several li. After waiting for a while, Xiaogua's face was full of pride. She brought back some spiritual herbs. These spiritual herbs were quite rare, and most of them weren't in Xiao Hua's space. Hearing Little Silver's chirping in the distance, Xiao Hua naturally knew what it had discovered. After landing, Xiao Hua discovered that Little Silver was actually anxiously scurrying around in the ground. However, Little Silver, who had always been able to freely escape through the earth, was only able to escape a few inches underground before being unable to go any further. Huh! A strange expression appeared in Xiao Hua's eyes. Forming a seal with his hands, he also tried to escape underground. However, he was only able to escape a few zhang underground before being unable to go any further. Confucian cultivators really have painstakingly operated this Yaotai Mountain for who knows how many years. I'm afraid that within several tens of thousands of li, the surface of the ground has been used with Confucian techniques. And it's possible that it's Taoist techniques. Xiao Hua looked pensive. No Taoist cultivator can use the 5 elements escape technique to explore underground, and it's also impossible for them to escape underground. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, "No need to go down. Let's see what's around us." Chirp, chirp. Little Silver replied a few times before running off in another direction. Not long after, it actually brought back some materials for refining tools, as well as a bloody horn. Wasn't that the horn of the giant hoe from before? Looking at the bloody horn, although Xiao Hua didn't know what use this thing had, thinking about how this horn was able to pierce through his nascent soul's hand, he knew that it was definitely a good thing. Xiao Hua put the horn into his space, then waved his nascent soul's hand to destroy all the trees within a few miles. Only then did he feel refreshed. Seeing that the sun didn't seem to move at all, Xiao Hua's heart stirred. He beckoned with his hand, and wind blew under Little Silver's feet. Little Silver swung its grass-like tail and landed on Xiao Hua's hand. Little Silver's tail naturally wrapped around Xiao Hua's pinky finger. Chirp, 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 chirp. Little Silver stood up, clasped its 2 little paws in front of its face, and bowed to Xiao Hua, as if asking what Xiao Hua wanted to do. Xiao Hua looked at Little Silver's appearance and was a little bewildered. When Little Yellow was here, he could faintly hear Little Silver's voice. Moreover, when Little Yellow and Little Black took the rejuvenation pill, Xiaohua didn't forget to give one to Little Silver. However, Little Yellow and Little Black could already speak, while Little Silver still couldn't speak. He didn't know if it was because Little Silver had eaten too many spirit herbs since childhood, or if Little Silver wasn't smart enough. Xiaohua regretted not letting Little Silver out to see what the Imperial Tutor's lot looked like before the Dragon Gate. When he described it to Little Silver at that moment, Little Silver tilted its head a little, and there was some confusion in its sparkling little eyes. Xiaohua could only stretch out a finger and point at the space between the little guy's eyebrows. In an instant, Little Silver's eyes lit up. It blinked its eyelids and sniffed its little nose. Its body flew out of Xiaohua's hand and it ran around in the air. To Xiaohua's surprise, after a while, the treasure-seeking mouse, which had always been known for its keen sense of smell, actually landed in his hand again. It raised its two little paws and spread its paws in a lifelike manner. If it wasn't for the fact that its shoulders were connected and it was extremely hard to distinguish, it would have shrugged its shoulders. Xiaohua rubbed his nose and understood that there were only two reasons why Little Silver couldn't find the Imperial Tutor's lot. One was that the closest Imperial Tutor's lot was beyond Little Silver's search range. The other was that the Imperial Tutor's lot had fallen inside the Imperial Array, which had completely concealed its aura. Chapter 3602. All right. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and flicked Little Silver's little but with his middle finger. Go look for it, this old man will follow you. Before Xiaohua could finish speaking, Little Silver's nose suddenly twitched, and his body turned into a silver light as he flew off in a certain direction. Great! Overjoyed, Xiaohua hurriedly used his wind escape technique to chase after Little Silver, and at the same time, he released his soul consciousness in that direction. After flying for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, they unexpectedly encountered two golden core cultivators. These two golden core cultivators were in a very sorry state and looked like they had just escaped from a defensive formation. When the two golden core cultivators saw Xiaohua and Little Silver, they were delighted. Seeing the joy in their eyes, how could Xiaohua not know what they were thinking? He coldly snorted and no longer concealed his cultivation. The pressure of a nascent soul cultivator suddenly gushed out, causing the two of them to be frightened to the point their faces turned deathly pale and they almost collapsed in the air. Xiaohua was too lazy to pay attention to them and directly flew after Little Silver. The two golden core cultivators dejectedly flew off in the opposite direction. It was just that as Little Silver flew, he stopped and looked around as if he couldn't find his way. Xiaohua smiled as he scooped Little Silver up and put him on his shoulder before continuing to fly forward. Not long after, the originally warm sunlight actually turned cold. Xiaohua saw two undulating mountain ranges appear in front of him. They looked very abrupt and were grayish-white in color. Hidden in the forest, they looked like two huge pythons biting each other as they surrounded a mountain stream with a radius of more than 10 li. There were no ancient trees in the mountain stream, only large craggy rocks of different sizes. Some were dozens of zhang tall, while others were several zhang tall. Wisps of cold air condensed into ice shards which were born in the mountain stream from time to time. Standing in midair, Xiaohua had already released his soul consciousness to scan the surroundings. He wasn't in a hurry to act, and only narrowed his eyes at the sun above his head. His gaze then fell on the two mountain ranges, as if he didn't care about the mountain stream at all. At that moment, a sharp wind suddenly blew just several zhang away from Xiaohua. This wind was extremely cold, and as soon as it appeared, it immediately swept up clusters of ice shards which flew toward Xiaohua. Little Silver, who was on Xiaohua's shoulder, suddenly quivered. His little nose twitched a few times, and he was about to fly toward the whirlwind. Come back! Xiaohua called out to Little Silver and then raised his head slightly to look at the mountain range opposite them. It was at this moment that Little Silver let out a shrill cry. Its small body suddenly curled up and the fur on its body exploded. Its two bright eyes were filled with vigilance as it looked at the mountain range just like Xiaohua. Above the mountain range, there were also two shadows. One was flying in front, and the other was following behind. The shadow in front was not big, but it was flying very fast. A moment later, a sharp divine sense swept over and swept past Xiao Hua before landing on Little Silver. This divine sense was very strange. When Little Silver's divine sense locked onto it, he trembled and whimpered a few times. He didn't dare to stay in the air any longer and first flew to Xiao Hua's shoulder. Then, feeling that it wasn't safe, he looked for Xiao Hua's right hand and landed. His little tail tightly wrapped around Xiao Hua's thumb, and he hid his little head between Xiao Hua's forefingers. His entire body curled up, looking very scared. Xiao Hua covered Little Silver with his hand as if to comfort him. He looked at where the shadow came from. When he saw it clearly, he saw that it was an ocelot several feet long. At this moment, the ocelot's eyes were narrowed into slits, and the yellow mark on its forehead that was very similar to the king character was particularly obvious. Behind the ocelot was another tall young cultivator. This cultivator looked very boorish, with a full beard, a pair of thick black eyebrows, leopard-like eyes, and a large mouth under his big nose. However, the cultivator's expression was rather arrogant, as if he was looking at the top of his head. Before he could fly closer, the middle nascent soul stage divine sense retracted from Little Silver's body and swept toward Xiao Hua. At this moment, Xiao Hua didn't hide his cultivation. The cultivator looked at Xiao Hua with a trace of disdain and casually cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist, please." Xiao Hua was a bit puzzled and cupped his hands. "I am Xiao Hua. Greetings, fellow Taoist. I am Soaring Lake Country's fairy Xiang Feng, junior brother. My Taoist name is Xiang Tian." Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't recognize him, the cultivator's face became even more disdainful. He nodded slightly and said, "Fellow Taoist, Zhao's face is a bit unfamiliar, and I've never heard of your name. May I know which senior you work for?" Xiao Hua smiled and said, "All right, Taoist Xiang Tian, I'm not working for any senior. I'm here to compete for the Imperial Tutor's lot at the Jade Pavilion meeting." "Oh, so you want to establish your own country?" Taoist Xiang Tian looked Xiao Hua up and down and said thoughtfully, "Fellow Taoist, Xiao has lofty ambitions. This old man admires you." I wouldn't dare. Seeing that Taoist Xiang Tian's behavior was a bit strange, Xiao Hua was puzzled and said with a smile. Xiang Tian waved his hand and said, "Since you're here to compete for the Imperial Tutor's lot, there's no conflict with this old man. Forget it, this old man will give you some face." "How much is your spirit-seeking mouse worth?" "Give me some face?" "How much is a spirit-seeking mouse worth?" Xiao Hua was stunned, but then he quickly realized and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiang Tian, I'm very sorry. This spirit-seeking mouse is this Xiao's treasure." "I never thought, Xiao Hua." Taoist Xiang Tian didn't wait for Xiao Hua to finish and said coldly, "Could it be that you've never heard of Fairy Xiang Feng?" Xiao Hua shook his head and said, "To be honest, this Xiao has never heard of it." Good. Taoist Xiang Tian nodded and said seriously, "Since fellow Taoist Xiao has never heard of Fairy Xiang Feng, then this old man will pretend that I didn't hear what fellow Taoist said. This spirit-seeking mouse is not bad. This old man will pay you 100 top-grade primal stones. Give it to this old man." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly in his heart. This Reverend Xiangtian was already a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator, but he was still so ignorant. Xiao Hua really didn't know how he cultivated to mid-nascent soul stage. Oh, it should be said how he lived to mid-nascent soul stage. Not to mention 100 top-grade primal stones, this Xiao wouldn't exchange it even if it was 10 million. Xiao Hua said indifferently, "If fellow Taoist Xiang Tian doesn't have anything else, then this Xiao will enter the defensive formation." Awoo! The ocelot suddenly let out a long howl in midair, and its golden fur puffed up like Little Silver's. It opened its eyes at the same time, and its gaze was like lightning as it looked at Little Silver. Little Silver let out a cry and tried to drill into the gap between Xiao Hua's hands. Unfortunately, how big could the gap between Xiao Hua's hands be? It was impossible for Little Silver to drill into it. Taoist Xiang Tian's expression changed greatly. He reached out his hand to touch the Qingquan bag on his waist, but he quickly put it down and said angrily, "Xiao Hua, don't be so shameless. This old man has already made things clear for you." Hurry up and give this spirit-seeking mouse to this old man. Once this old man's ocelot devours this spirit-seeking mouse and grows up several times, this old man will tell Fairy Xiang Feng your name. Not to mention that you want to establish a country on the hidden immortal continent. Even if you want to cultivate to the late stage of nascent soul, this fairy can help you. Hearing that the ocelot wanted to devour Little Silver, Xiaohua suddenly realized why Little Silver was so scared. This ocelot should be the spirit-seeking mouse's natural enemy. Xiaohua coldly looked at the ocelot and then at Taoist Xiang Tian. He said, "Fellow Taoist Xiang Tian, this Xiao will treat your words as fart. If you want to enter the defensive formation, this Xiao won't stop you. But if you have other thoughts, don't blame this Xiao for being ruthless and not showing mercy." "Haha, not showing mercy?" Taoist Xiang Tian laughed. "This old man has lived for thousands of years, and those who dared to say such words to me have already turned into ashes. This old man really didn't expect someone to be so arrogant in this Jade Pavilion conference." Xiaohua was so angry that he laughed. He never thought that his first move in this Jade Pavilion conference would be against a Taoist cultivator. Seeing Taoist Xiang Tian raise his hand to form a seal, Xiaohua didn't dare to be careless. He stretched out his hand and was about to release the spirit-killing light. Faced with this kind of cultivator who didn't know what was good for him, Xiaohua absolutely wouldn't show mercy. Who knew how many Taoist cultivators Taoist Xiang Tian had killed before he met him? Ao. The ocelot was clearly connected to Taoist Xiang Tian. Its tail curled up like lightning and it raised its front paws and pounced at Little Silver in Xiaohua's hand. At this moment, a beast roar that was very similar to the ocelot's rang out in the distance, followed by a pleasantly surprised voice. "Fellow Taoist Xiao?" Taoist Xiang Tian frowned slightly and stopped his hand seal. The surging vital qi of heaven and earth around him also stagnated. Xiaohua was also stunned. His hands stopped in midair. When the two of them looked up, they saw a white-browed nascent soul cultivator with a joyful expression on his face riding a two-headed monster flying towards them. "Taoist Yuan Qin?" Xiaohua immediately called out the name when he saw this nascent soul cultivator. However, when he looked around Taoist Yuan Qin, he didn't see Hai Hongzi or Hong Songzi. Ao. While Xiaohua was thinking, the monster under Taoist Yuan Qin's feet opened its mouth and roared again. This monster looked like a python, but when it opened its mouth, it roared like an ocelot. Furthermore, when it roared, it spewed out a thick blue cloud. Taoist Xiang Tian's expression was a little strange, but the ocelot was very excited. It no longer looked at Little Silver and instead roared at the two-headed monster. "Let's go!" Although Taoist Xiang Tian was domineering, he was still a nascent soul cultivator. When he clearly saw Taoist Yuan Qing's cultivation and the monster under him, he immediately made a decision. He no longer paid attention to Xiaohua, and with a shout, he flew towards the source of the sound. The ocelot, on the other hand, growled a few times unwillingly and followed Taoist Xiang Tian into the wind tunnel. Before it left, it even stuck out its scarlet tongue and licked its lips. But at this moment, Little Silver was showing off again. It actually raised its fat butt and shook it left and right in the air, and its small tail also swayed. It really wasn't clear whether its fear just now was real or just an act. Chapter 3603. Xiaohua watched Reverend Xiangtian disappear with a cold smile on his face. Looking at the ocelot, he knew that Reverend Xiangtian might not give up on killing him. Now that Reverend Xiangtian saw that Xiaohua had come to help him, he didn't know the situation and was avoiding him for the time being. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, what's going on?" Reverend Yuan Qing landed on the ground, and the two-headed monster shrank down to only a few feet long. It coiled around Reverend Yuan Qing's arm, and its four eyes flashed with a dark green light as it stared fixedly at Little Silver in Xiaohua's hand. But at that moment, Little Silver wasn't afraid at all. He wrapped his paws around his mouth and licked his little tongue before rubbing his face protectively a few times, as if he was washing his face. The most ridiculous thing was that after washing his face, Little Silver actually stood up and cupped his hands elegantly at immortal Yuan Qing, as if he were a little person. "Haha. Reverend Yuan Qing naturally knew what his pet was thinking. Seeing little Silver like this, he laughed heartily and hit the two-headed monster on the forehead with his palm, shouting, "Evil creature, if you dare do that again, I'll pull out your tendons and skin you alive." Awoo! The two-headed monster gave a low howl, looking very aggrieved. It shrank down again and hid its head behind Reverend Yuan Qing, not daring to look at Little Silver again. Xiao Hua smiled slightly and rubbed Little Silver's head with his finger. He looked at Reverend Yuan Qing and said, "What else could it be? This so-called Reverend Xiangtian just wants to attack me." He's Reverend Xiangtian? Reverend Yuan Qing was blank for a moment before a strange expression appeared on his face. He looked meaningfully in the direction where Reverend Xiangtian had disappeared, as if he had already heard of this Reverend Xiangtian. Xiao Hua was blank for a moment before he rubbed his chin and smiled. "Oh, fellow Taoist Yuan Qing, do you know this guy?" "This guy?" Reverend Yuan Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "This is a nascent soul cultivator, but fellow Taoist Xiao actually calls him, this guy. You really don't take a Taoist nascent soul cultivator seriously. Whether it's a golden core cultivator or a nascent soul cultivator, I respect all righteous people. For a thief who covets this Xiao's wealth, this Xiao called him a bastard is already enough." Xiao Hua said with a deadpan expression. "What if we tie up a late nascent soul stage cultivator? This late nascent soul stage cultivator regards this middle nascent soul stage cultivator as the apple of his eye?" Reverend Yuanqing's words carried a hint of ridicule. Xiao Hua blinked his eyes. Thinking about Taoist Master Xiangtian's big and burly appearance, in any case, she had nothing to do with Taoist Master Yuan Qing's beloved daughter. Taoist Yuan Qing looks at Xiao Hua's somewhat dazed expression and seems to understand something. He says with a low laugh, "It seems that Taoist Xiao really hasn't heard the story of Taoist Xiang Tian and Fairy Xiang Feng." Xiao Hua shook his head. This Xiao has indeed never heard of it. However, if a pair of golden boy and jade girl cultivated to the nascent soul stage at the same time, then in my hidden immortal continent, it can be considered a beautiful story. Immortal Yuan Qing almost burst out laughing. He lowered his voice and said, "They can't be called a golden couple, but a golden couple. Golden boy and jade boy?" Xiao Hua was rather astonished. He did not seem to understand what Reverend Yuan Qing was talking about. Taoist Yuan Qing laughs loudly. He pats the two-headed monster with his hand and yells, "Evil creature, quickly leave. Don't listen to some corner." The two-headed monster roars loudly and flies towards the place where Taoist Xiang Tian fell. Taoist Yuan Qing says to Xiao Hua with a smile, "Taoist Xiao, let's go in first. We'll talk as we walk." Xiao Hua asks curiously, "Didn't fellow Taoist Yuan Qing make an appointment with Hong Songzi and Hai Hongzi? Why did you come here yourself? Aren't you going to look for those two first?" "We did have an agreement. Moreover, the three of us also have a magic tool to communicate with each other. However, this magic tool can only respond within 100 miles. I have already searched several places but did not find any trace of those two. Now that we have met Taoist Xiao and the trace of a rare treasure, we naturally have to look for the rare treasure first. Actually, when I saw fellow Taoist, I already wanted to join hands with fellow Taoist. Unfortunately, Hai Hongzi did not agree and I had no other choice. Now, it seems that I still have fate with fellow Taoist Xiao." Xiao Hua nods and says, "Since that's the case, it's fine. This Xiao is aiming for the Imperial Preceptor's fortune while fellow Taoist Yuan Qing is aiming for the rare treasure. We don't conflict with each other and can cooperate." That's right. Taoist Yuan Qing glances at the place where the two-headed monster disappeared and says, "This defensive formation seems to be closing. Let's go in first. I also want to tell fellow Taoist the story of Fairy Xiang Feng and Taoist Xiang Tian." "Good," Xiao Hua says with a smile. "Fellow Taoist Yuan Qing, please go in first." Taoist Yuan Qing does not hold back. Since the two-headed monster did not give any warning, the entrance of the defensive formation was naturally not dangerous. He moves his body and enters the wind tunnel. At the same time, he tells Xiao Hua the story of Fairy Xiang Feng and Taoist Xiang Tian in a low voice. Taoist Yuan Qing does not want to talk about it, but when he does, Xiao Hua feels disgusted. After all, Fairy Xiang Feng is not a real fairy but a male cultivator. However, she likes men and thinks of herself as a fairy, so she calls herself Fairy Xiang Feng after reaching the nascent soul stage. This Taoist Xiang Tian is naturally Fairy Xiang Feng's exclusive property. Fairy Xiang Feng likes Taoist Xiang Tian very much and uses all kinds of methods and elixirs to help Taoist Xiang Tian reach the nascent soul stage. Under Fairy Xiang Feng's connivance, Taoist Xiang Tian naturally does not look in anyone's eyes and can take whatever he wants. Others are afraid of Fairy Xiang Feng's power and can only be angry but do not dare to say anything. Damn it! Xiao Hua follows Taoist Yuan Qing into the formation and sees fog everywhere. Not only is he unable to see far with his naked eyes, even his spiritual sense feels like it is being corroded. He swings his arm as if to drive the fog away and says, "How can there be such a person in this world? It's simply filthy to the extreme." This Xiao is covered in goosebumps just listening to it. Hee hee. Taoist Yuan Qing says with a smile, "There are countless strange people in this world, it's just that we don't know about them. You don't even know how ruthless Fairy Xiang Feng's methods are. No cultivator who falls into Fairy Xiang Feng's hands can come out alive. Even people who hear about his methods are disgusting. No one wants to offend him, and no one wants to fall into his hands." But why is that? Xiao Hua, of course, knows that Taoist Yuan Qing has not finished his words, so he asks hurriedly. Taoist Yuan Qing says, "Actually, Fairy Xiang Feng is also a pitiful person. Although he is very intelligent since he was a child, his fate is full of misfortunes. Before he became a baby, he encountered many disasters. As for what kind of disaster he encountered, it's impossible to know now. Because all the people related to him were killed by him after he became a baby. I'm afraid it's because of his previous experience that he has such a strange hobby." This. Xiao Hua shakes his head slightly. "This person's temperament, I'm afraid, is already twisted." Roar? Just as Xiao Hua is speaking telepathically, he suddenly hears an angry roar. Taoist Yuan Qing's expression changes drastically when he hears it, and an embarrassed and angry voice bursts out from the bottom of his tongue. "Which blind little bastard dares to bully my Si Hong?" Saying this, Taoist Yuan Qing doesn't have time to greet Xiao Hua, and his figure turns into a rainbow as he rushes in the direction of the monster Si Hong's angry roar. However, Reverend Yuan Qing was truly infuriated. His entire body was flashing with a dark green brilliance. Wherever the rainbow touched, the dense fog would be pushed away. Moreover, the dense fog within a radius of a few feet to the left was frozen into wisps of sparkling and translucent fog, which then fell to the ground. Xiao Hua looks at Taoist Yuan Qing's back and then at the icy fog, and a look of understanding flashes in his eyes. Since Taoist Yuan Qing's target isn't the Imperial Preceptor's lot, then it must be the cold ghost Gaul. Roar roar. Taoist Yuan Qing's figure disappears, and a series of roars can be heard in the distance. Although these sounds are very similar, Xiao Hua can clearly hear that they are the cries of the ocelot and Si Hong. At that moment, Little Silver, who is curled up in Xiao Hua's palm, suddenly stands up. He looks extremely excited and points his little paw in front of him, urging Xiao Hua to speed up. Xiao Hua smiles slightly. His figure also sways, and he turns into a golden rainbow as he chases after Taoist Yuan Qing. The distance between them is no less than several li. Before Xiao Hua can pass through the thick fog, roars can be heard one after another, and the thick fog surges even more. Xiao Hua doesn't need to release his soul sense to know that a fierce battle is taking place up ahead. Sure enough, Xiao Hua flew to a place where the fog was slightly thinner. Reverend Yuan Qing was holding a small halberd that was about a foot long. His body flashed with an intense light, and his eyes were slightly red. He was vigilantly looking in front of him. On the other side of Reverend Yuan Qing was Reverend Xiangtian. Reverend Xiangtian had a look of contempt on his face. He didn't bring out any magic treasures, and he didn't even look at Reverend Yuan Qing. His gaze was fixed on the space between the two of them. Si Hong, who had taken out the two-headed monster, was fighting the ocelot. The ocelot is clearly more agile than Si Hong, and is also much more powerful. In the short time that Xiaohua disappeared, the ocelot has already bitten several wounds on Si Hong's back. Thick blue blood seeped out from the wounds. While Si Hong was in pain, he seemed to have gone mad. His two snake-like heads roared and spat out aqua-blue venom towards the ocelot. Unfortunately, the ocelot dodged and spat out an earth-colored light from its mouth. Not only did it avoid the venom, but it also swept the venom back. Although the venom was powerful, even the surrounding fog would be corroded by the venom. However, it had no effect on the ocelot. When Xiaohua appears, Taoist Xiangqian immediately shifts his excited gaze away from the ocelot and coldly glances at Xiaohua. Although he doesn't say anything, the warning in his eyes is obvious. Ayo! At this time, Si Hong's left head roars loudly. Suddenly, it grows 3 times larger and opens its mouth to bite down on the ocelot. The ocelot also roars loudly, and then actually pounces towards Si Hong's mouth. Si Hong was stunned for a moment, but soon after, he opened his other mouth and let out a roar. He twisted his neck in a strange manner and attacked the ocelot's tail from the bottom. Chapter 3604. Hee. A strange smile appeared on Reverend Xiangqian's face. He shifted his gaze away from Xiaohua and looked at the ocelot with excitement. Although Xiaohua didn't know how powerful the ocelot was, he knew that Si Hong was about to suffer a great loss. Reverend Yuanqing's face was so gloomy that it seemed like it would drip water at any moment. Sure enough, when the head above Si Hong's head was about to pounce down at lightning speed and the sharp fangs in its mouth were revealed, the ocelot suddenly arched its back and slightly moved to the side when it was only a few feet away from Si Hong's head. Then, the tail that had been curled up behind its back suddenly stretched out and hit Si Hong's head with a pa sound. Si Hong's entire body instantly moved a few feet away. Si Hong's had only moved a few feet away from the ocelot in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. Only the dark green poisonous fog brushed past half of the ocelot's body. Ayo! Si Hong's lower head was hit by the ocelot's tail and seemed to be a little dizzy. Si Hong's upper head couldn't be stopped in its tracks, and with a loud bang sound, the upper head couldn't close in time and bit down on the lower head. Not only that, the ocelot, which had just dodged the attack, once again streaked across the air. As it shook its head, its body suddenly expanded, and it bit down on the neck of Si Hong's head. In an instant, dark green blood flowed out from the wound. Si Hong was in great pain. His entire body twisted in midair and his long tail smashed down on the ocelot with the force of a mountain. Ayo, ayo! The ocelot's throat roared and its tail flashed with brilliance as it rapidly expanded. It used all its strength to bite Si Hong's neck and used its tail to attack Si Hong. How dare you, evil creature! Reverend Yuanqing activated the small halberd in his hand. The small halberd immediately emitted a brilliant light and a python-like shadow emerged from the runes on the halberd. It seemed like it would turn into a dragon and attack as soon as it left his hand. In the distance, Reverend Xiangqian's face turned dark red and his eyes flashed with passion. He looked up at Reverend Yuanqing and said coldly, "Animals fight among themselves. If someone disturbs us, don't blame this old man for not treating you as a human." Reverend Yuanqing bit his lip as if he was enduring and waiting for help, but he didn't look at Xiaohua. At this moment, Little Silver's tail in Xiaohua's hand was released from Xiaohua's thumb. That little claw slightly scratched Xiaohua's palm, as if it wanted to move. Xiaohua's heart thumped and he flicked Little Silver's but with his middle finger. Little Silver actually immediately understood Xiaohua's meaning. Wind stirred up under his feet as he flew in the direction of the ocelot and Si Hong. Compared with the ocelot's and Si Hong's imposing and Xiaohua's body, it was pitifully small and pitifully weak. Reverend Yuanqing's when he saw Little Yuanqing's. Little to Xiangqian, Reverend Yuanqing. Seeing Xiaohua make a move, Reverend Yuanqing was reassured. He didn't think that Little Silver could do anything, but he was sure that Xiaohua wouldn't just stand by and watch. Knowing this, Reverend Yuanqing suddenly attacked with the small halberd in his hand. With a cold aura and a dazzling splendor, the small halberd streaked through the air. The tip of the halberd lengthened as it pierced the space between the ocelot's eyebrows. "How dare you!" Reverend Xiangtian had been on guard for a long time. He roared angrily and his whole body trembled as if he was extremely excited. He opened his mouth and a flying sword turned into 10,000 winter plum blossoms and shot into the air. Seeing that the battle between the two nascent soul cultivators was about to break out, Xiaohua put his hand on his waist as if to take out some magic treasure from his Qiankuan bag. But at that moment, Little Silver, who had already flown to the edge of the battle between the ocelot and Si Hong, abruptly turned into a thin silver light and charged straight for the ocelot's back. He was faster than lightning and furthermore, he didn't make the slightest sound. Xiaohua was stunned, Reverend Yuanqing was stunned, and Reverend Xiangtian was also stunned. The magic treasures of the two nascent soul cultivators froze in midair. The ocelot was now locked in a stalemate with Si Hong and couldn't pay too much attention to it. However, the ocelot had also sensed Little Silver's attack, and its body immediately emitted a layer of earthy yellow light. This light was surrounded by wisps of demon fog, and its brocade fur stood straight up, each strand flashed with light. Swish! It was like a stubborn stone thrown into the water, and the ripples didn't seem to have the power to resist it. Little Silver pounced on the ocelot's back. Whether it was the defensive light, the sizzling demon fog, or the brocade fur, they couldn't resist Little Silver's bite at all. Little Silver's body sank into the ocelot's back. "Awoo!" The ocelot cried out in pain. Before it could pull its mouth away from Si Hong's neck, there was a flash of silver light in front of its chest, and Little Silver actually flew out from there. As soon as Little Silver flew out, the ocelot immediately went limp in midair. Pa! There was a crisp sound as Si Hong's tail hit the ocelot's forehead. Its head was smashed to smithereens, and its entire body fell from midair. The whole process took only a few breaths. Not only was Reverend Yuanqing in disbelief, even Xiaohua himself felt that it was a little inconceivable. "Awoo!" Reverend Xiangtian let out a roar similar to an ocelot's. The cold plum blossom flying sword shone brightly, and the pressure of a middle nascent soul cultivator soared into the sky from the top of Reverend Xiangtian's head. Reverend Xiangtian was furious. At that moment, Xiaohua's unhurried and cold voice rang out. "Animals fight among themselves. If someone disturbs us, don't blame this old man for not treating them as human beings." Seeing Reverend Xiangtian's anger, Reverend Yuanqing's heart turned cold. The small halberd magic treasure was about to rush into the air, but when he heard Xiaohua say the exact same thing as Reverend Xiangtian, he couldn't help but laugh. "You brat!" Reverend Xiangtian was even more furious, and he pounced on Xiaohua in fury. Reverend Xiangtian had actually abandoned Reverend Yuanqing and wanted to kill Xiaohua. As soon as Reverend Xiangtian's pressure was released, it immediately stirred up the clouds, and the thick fog within a radius of several hundred feet was swept away. Xiaohua sneered, and with a flip of his hand, he was about to hit his own head. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. Rumble! The space within a radius of more than 10 miles was filled with thunderbolts, and a thick righteous qi was generated from all directions, falling towards Taoist Xiang Tian. An aura akin to the might of the heavens was born from this wave of awe-inspiring qi. Not only did it envelop Reverend Xiangtian, but it also enveloped Xiaohua and Reverend Yuanqing, as well as several tens of kilometers around them. Reverend Xiangtian's pressure had triggered the restrictions of the defensive formation. But that wasn't the end of it. The thick fog within several tens of kilometers was dispersed by the awe-inspiring qi, revealing the true appearance of the defensive formation. Below Xiaohua and the others, icy ponds appeared one after another. Icy rivers that were as thin as palm prints also appeared. The dense fog actually came from the icy ponds and icy rivers. At this moment, there were still wisps of fog rushing into the air. Following the appearance of the defensive formation was a group of cultivators scattered around the glacial ponds and glacial ponds. There were at least a dozen of these cultivators, and aside from the nascent soul cultivator furthest away from Xiaohua and the others, the rest were all gold core cultivators. These cultivators' chi was affected by the awe-inspiring chi, and they had no choice but to release their pressure and magic treasures to resist with all their might. Some of the weaker ones were even knocked to the ground by the awe-inspiring chi. The thick fog dispersed, and Xiao Hua and the others recovered their divine sense. With a sweep of their divine sense, the group of cultivators unconsciously focused their attention on a cliff at the edge of the space. They saw a ball of two-colored light flickering there, and even the divine sense of a nascent soul cultivator couldn't see it clearly. The aura of the strange treasure was coming from this ball of light. Xiao Hua and the others were some distance away from the strange treasure, but the other nascent soul cultivator wasn't too far away. Just as they discovered the strange treasure, the nascent soul cultivator's body turned into a rainbow, and he charged towards the strange treasure as fast as lightning, shattering the awe-inspiring chi along the way. Damn it! The culprit who triggered the defensive formation, Taoist Soaring Heaven, was furious and cursed. The flying sword in the air was too late to attack Xiao Hua, so it hurriedly turned around and flew towards the nascent soul cultivator like a blooming plum blossom. From the looks of it, it seemed like it wanted to snatch the strange treasure from the nascent soul cultivator. Damn it, this bastard, isn't he just courting death? Xiao Hua's palm stopped in midair, and he couldn't help but ridicule Taoist Soaring Heaven, who was almost 20% faster than the nascent soul cultivator. Taoist Yuan Qing didn't dare to put away the small halberd. He pointed his finger, and the small halberd flew back to the top of his head to protect him. Then, he waved his sleeve and put away the heavily injured two-headed monster Sihong. He coldly said, "Although we are mid-nascent soul cultivators in this bastard's eyes, we are no different from early nascent soul cultivators. Not to mention the three of us, even if two more came, he would still be the same. Today, if we don't join forces to kill him, we won't be able to leave Yaotai Mountain. Even if we can avoid Taoist Soaring Heaven, we won't be able to escape Fairy Soaring Feng." Xiao Hua faintly smiled and opened his hand. The happy little silver flew back into his palm. Its claws were still digging into its mouth, as if it had eaten its fill and was cleaning its mouth. Looking at little silver's body, there wasn't the slightest bit of blood or filth. "What do you think, fellow Taoist Xiao?" Seeing the mysterious smile on Xiao Hua's face, Taoist Yuan Qing couldn't figure out what Xiao Hua was thinking. He had no choice but to get straight to the point. Taoist Soaring Heaven's ocelot was indeed killed by Ai's Sihong, but in the end, it was still killed by fellow Taoist's pet. "Oh, Taoist, I don't want to tie Taoist together with me. I am very happy that Taoist was able to take action at the critical moment. Since that's the case, let's kill him." Xiao Hua's expression didn't change and he didn't explain anything. Taoist Yuan Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He cupped his hands and said, "Oh, Taoist Xiao, if it were that easy, would I have needed to say so much in front of you? If Taoist I really want it, then let's hurry over. This strange treasure. I don't want it anymore. I'll give it to that fellow Taoist in front of me. Of course, if Taoist wants it, then the three of us can join forces to kill him." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.